Yeah.
The reason we're gonna redo that whole thing is because master slipped out of my mouth and my mind immediately went like, did you really just do that, Garth?
Yep. No, this is the challenge we always have, and it's something I'm always like continually correcting people on, or like trying to even correct myself on it. Whereas like I have the little like Freudian slip whenever I like actually forget, where I'm actually trying to reframe my mindset of saying that self-mastery or even mastery is not a place to get to, it's a state to live through.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's I've even, because again, like a lot of the things that we started with or we grew up with or anything like that, like we are forced that idea of, oh, we need to get to a place of mastery, right? We need to get somewhere, we need to do something, and then like when we reach that certain milestone, then we're a master, right? We're an immortal, we're enlightened, we're this, we're that, we're whatever it is. It's like actually reframing your mindset to say that enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, right, the path of self-discovery is the continuum that we're moving through and we are continually on, is such a more, I think, a more empowering concept than saying, hey, my journey's going to end at this point. But like, I'm a master at this point, you know? And it's like, even I'm catching myself doing it where it's like, oh yeah, like when I'm making course titles or whatever, like, because it's super easy for like SEO function or anything, right? It's like, oh, hey, mastery is a fun word, right? But it's like, actually, like, are we actually like, what are we talking about as mastery? Like, what, like, are we mastering the concept of mastery here? Like, what does that mean when we unpack it? You know, it's an interesting thing. But yeah, master energy worker. That's a fun one. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Well,
suppose
and
be
I
a
say that
master
because
for teaching others, right? But I mean, it depends.
exactly. Well, I mean, and that's why it comes up. Like, actually, we may not re-edit the entryway here. I don't know. Like, it's a good topic just having like so about like master. Like, because like when I say that, like a master energy worker, I mean in the sense of like a Reiki master who knows the journey is
Yeah,
not over. Just like a Taoist master knows the journey is not over. And
yeah,
so like, yeah, like master your master actually means like, there's continual learning. Like even if we were to look at the Jedi, and I know that's like a sci-fi, but it's like even then, like you obtain the level of master, meaning you can now teach somebody, which
yeah,
teaching is the great, like when you teach someone else, you learn more. And so even that state, like hitting the rank of master was a level of like, no, like you are now ready to teach and your lessons are not over by any means, you know?
yeah.
And like, I know I'm using sci-fi, but like even Yoda would be like, I'm not done learning. But like, that's how all the great, like real masters, like real people I know in life and that are actual things, like even a master foreman, someone that he's a master foreman. He knows how to do all the things. He's still learning. He's not done.
Yeah.
Is doesn't know it all.
Yeah, we know this is the thing. Like again, I'm like, even though we're using sci-fi, like, this is like all my students like always pick me up on this so much because I use Star Wars as a reference, or like the concept of the Force I use like so much in my teaching because it's such a good like pop culture concept that people can attach to, or they can cling to so easily that they have a basic understanding. It's like when you actually unpack, like, and again, we can go into a huge like a history of like how George Lucas thought of the concept and where it came from and all
Where
this
it
kind
came
of thing.
from. Yeah.
It basically just comes down to like, it's basically the Tao effectively, right? Or it's
It
like
is.
some kind of like universal order of natural like life generating tool. Or like even if you look at the way the Force is described in Star Wars, right? It's this field that connects all living things that is generated by all living things, right? And it's like there are tons of different actual real world equivalents to it, whether you're going down things like Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance theories and things like that, or even just the basic concept of that there's no such thing as empty space, right? That there is some, again, we're getting into like weird quantum shit here, right? But like the 0 point energy field and all that kind of thing, right? Where there is this overarching connection between things. It's like the way it's described in Star Wars, even though it is a sci-fi, is not that far off from basic philosophical concepts that do actually exist in Eastern mysticism, and it's like even then when you look at Star Wars, I think the main, if we take the Jedi as an example, right, their main sort of inspiration or real world inspiration was Stoicism, or like the main sort of detachment from the world, or that kind of like detached perspective on things, the primary influence of Stoicism. And Stoicism is again, especially again talking to the guys here, especially for like male, like masculine empowerment, Stoicism is such a powerful tool, right? The Stoic philosophy is such a powerful tool, especially for cultivating sort of a masculine mindset, right? But one of the things that I'm always consistently lamenting with Stoicism is it's undergone the same thing as kind of a lot of weird spiritual topics also in recent years, where it's kind of undergone the self-help binge, where it's like it's kind of been appropriated by a lot of these modern spiritual circles and self-empowerment, self-help circles. And in doing like it contains some of the it still contains some of the core concepts, but one of the things I've noticed happen, and the same things happen with like alchemy, but what ends up happening is when it gets exposed to that sort of self-help avenue and people start making sort of self-help content based on it, it actually loses the core mystical elements of it, like the things that made it inherently mystical, the thing that made it inherently esoteric originally as an interesting philosophy. It's actually lost a lot of those, and that depth of understanding has been replaced with kind of basic budget self-help, or like Instagram posts about like, hey, the Stoics thought this, you can think about this, or people forever quoting Marcus Aurelius. And he's great. I love Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, he's wonderful. He's got a lot of good stuff, but there is some
Yeah.
misquoting.
Oh yeah, all the time. It's like, well, there's misquoting and mistranslations, and this is the other
I
thing
guess that's
that
more
like
what I meant was mistranslations. Yeah.
Yeah, like then there's like a difference. There's like one of the things that you find in Stoicism is so interesting. And it's kind of a Platonic concept as well, but like it's really fleshed out in Stoicism. Is this idea of cosmic sympathy, and it's this basic idea that everything is ultimately connected. Where it's like something that you do in this chain of being or this area of the world has a corresponding effect in another area of the world, right? Or some energetic movement, something's going on in the divine realm, the celestial realm, whatever you want to call it, has a corresponding effect down here. And like when you get deeper into things like magic and occultism, this is ultimately how you establish different correspondences, right? Like why directions are associated with certain elements, or why certain elements are associated with different materials, or why different ideas or planets are associated with different things, right? It comes down to universal sympathy or correspondence, right? It's that whole thing of as above, so below. But that concept is honestly like at the core of a lot of ancient Stoicism. If you go back to like Zeno or whatever, or all of the old like course type philosophers, they were equally talking about a conception of God and the idea of a universally sort of corresponding universe that existed in sympathy with each other. In fact, the idea, like the Stoic idea of God, is as a fiery creator, right? It's this enlivening fire that exists. Like that's the conception of God in Stoicism, where like the God is fire, right? It's this fiery being that's actively creating things. It's the intellect, the mind, right? It's that initial like force of willpower that creates. It's like a lot of that esoteric imagery is missing from a lot of like the modern self-help Stoicism. Well, I'm like forever lamenting it because it's like it's really interesting and it helps you deepen your practice when you understand it, but it's not there. And the same thing happened with alchemy, where everyone kind of now thinks that alchemy, like since Jung for the most part, everyone thinks alchemy is kind of akin to self-help, where it's like, oh, actually, none of the alchemists in the Middle Ages were actually talking about metals and lead and gold. They were actually secretly talking about like spiritual transformation. It's like, I hate to break it to you, but no one before like the 1920s thought that. Right? Like that it didn't exist in any kind of alchemical manuscript in history at all, right? Like there was probably some of them that were interested in spiritual stuff. Like spirituality is a part of alchemy, sure, but like to make that assumption and say, oh, well, actually, none of the alchemists were actually talking about metals at all. They were all secretly talking about like spiritual transformation. It's like, I'm going to have to check you on that,
Well, and that's just an example of where it's like, oh, let's put them in a box. Let's put in like this understanding of like what we think happened. Now it must be this. And it's like, I'm sure they were spiritualists, and maybe it was both. Like maybe it was like, yes, they're working on lead, but they also knew that the concept of transmutation applies to the physical as much as it applies to the emotional and the mental,
right.
And that's why like for myself, like a course I took recently, like it, was labeled in-depth psychology alchemy, like alchemy of the in-depth psyche. We're going to use the alchemical processes to look at your mind, to look at your, and but going through them going, okay, here's how they would do something over here in alchemy. And that's how it would turn this into this. If you were to apply it to you in your psyche and in your life, how would that apply? And we can even use just the example of fire, period. And that's just like the basic beginning. But it's like, okay, like when you're and alchemists, like they have their beaker, their cauldron, their whatever, and they're doing something to change the element. And it's either adding temperature or removing temperature. And so like even when we go through something, it's like for an alchemist, like when you're going to put something into your creation, you're either going to put it into the fire that's going to warm up what you're already working inside your cauldron. I'm using the word cauldron, it could be a beaker. You know, whatever you're
Containers
working
in
on,
general,
your
yeah.
container, whatever you put in that container, you know, you could put it into the fire to heat up the container, or you can put it into the container itself to get mixed in with what you're doing. And
Yeah.
so like that's kind of like when you're faced with a story in your life, it's like, okay, you failed. You had a really hard time at something. You did not do that great. Is that now the opportunity of like you put that into the fire and it gives you more energy to work on what you were already working on? Or do you put that fire into the cauldron to be purified? Like one's fuel for the fire, one's transmuting that energy. They're both getting transmuted, but different ways, you know, and it's a different intention behind it. One is literally getting rid of it, one is working with it. You know, and so like, but I hear people all the time, like they're like, oh yeah, that's just what a chemist would doing all the time. Like, no, 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 no. Like this is taking their principles and applying it into how we can use it today. Even if you're not a chemist, even if you're not someone working in the physical transmutation of material, you can still learn from it. You know, and this is what people do all the time. Like even with the Force, for example, it's like, yeah, like George Lucas pulled that from the Tao, but like even, and this is why I love Eric Pepin's work, who wrote the Handbook of the Navigator, which is a great book if you're getting into spirituality period. Like it goes pretty deep and gets into some stuff, but in a very explainable way. Yeah, in a very explainable way. Like it's very straightforward. But like he talks about the Force, and it's like, yeah, there's a negativeness, and by negatives I mean like negative ions, negative, you know, and there's a positive force, like positive ions and so forth. You know, or neutrons and electrons and protons, if you want to break it down into the physics realm. That's what he's referring to. But it's like, but yeah, if you have enough neutrons in something and not enough protons, it is a certain thing. And so like one way he explains, like when we get into like emotions, it's like, quote unquote, if you have enough angry neutrons in your body, it's hard to have enough glad or joyful protons. Like, you know, again, using the example of something to turn it internal, you know, and that's kind of like even, and I just to talk on stoicism too, but like with the Force and stoicism, like that's like where people get that from is like, you know, the samurai being so stoic, being so this ideal, calm, stoic man, and only pulls the blade out when necessary, always speaks with respect, is so honed. It's like all of that is actually coming from them observing nature, observing life, observing humans and what doesn't work. And then they formed a creed or a code that did work for them. And granted, I'm taking, you know, samurais, which is a very small section of stoicism, but it's sort of where a lot of people look at it when they think of at least myself, like at least when I was taught about stoicism, it was like this, the stoic samurai, the stoic, you know, or the stoic man, you know, the good, you know, good old boy who keeps the you know, quote unquote rules, honors women, opens the door, knows what the sidewalk rule is, you know, knows how to do different things, speaks proper. It's every, you know, dad and mom's dream. It's like all of that was based on looking at what worked in life and how people got joy in life and then adopting a creed.
Yeah, essentially, right? And then it's like, yeah, there's I mean, well, there is like a weird intersection with stoicism and samurai, because like if you go down the samurai route, right, they have like the whole Bushido code and everything like that, which is its own thing.
Its own thing. That's why I was like, I'm zooming in here, but it's like off, but it's in.
Yeah, it's a similar example, right? And there are some similarities in Bushido and stoicism, right? Like, yeah, but you do like when you think of what the stoic man is, or like what a stoic individual is, even, it's ultimately someone who has control of their reactions, right? It's like how you are choosing to react with things, and it's like you can approach that in a stoic way. And like it's interesting that like stoic has become an adjective now. Like you can say, oh, this is a stoic thing, right? Or like you can approach something in a stoic way. And to me, at least, like one of the founding sort of core ideas behind stoicism, and really even a lot of like you find it in a lot of the Greek philosophies and stuff as well, but it's this control over passion, or like the base urges, where it's like, are you being reactive and therefore are you at the mercy of all of your base urges and at the mercy of all the things that happen to you, or do you have self-control? And like, where do you get that self-control? When you go deep into it, like it's that sense of reason, it's that intellect, that internal fire that we have that grants us that ability to react in the way that we choose to react, you know. And it's like, and this is one of the things, I mean, we've talked about this before, right? But it's one of the issues I have with the word trigger, especially. It's like, it's a big issue for me when like people nowadays, it's become a bit of a fad, honestly, And like I might get cancelled for saying this. I've got my hands up. But I think it's become a bit of a fad for people to just say I'm triggered by something or I'm offended by something. You know, it's like when I think about it, saying I'm triggered by something, it's like, and I hold my hand up, say it. I still get triggered, right? I still get upset with things. Like things still happen. I'm like, hey, that sucks, right? Absolutely. But saying that you're triggered is really no different than saying, oh, my arm hurts, or oh, my leg hurts, or I have a sensation somewhere, right? It's like, okay, that's fine. Like you'll know you're perceiving a reaction to something. Like that's great. Like as humans, we are naturally wired to discern and judge and that kind of thing. It's how our brain works, right? We are moving towards pleasure away from pain, and there is a level of judgment that comes with that. So you're looking at things that are happening to you in the world, and you're judging them, or you're perceiving them, and saying, hey, this doesn't feel good, this does feel good, right? But it's kind of shifted, like the narrative around it has shifted from what I've seen. Like people are saying they'll get triggered by something and then suddenly they'll just collapse and they'll cave in. It's like, oh, well, I'm triggered, that's it, everything's done. Whatever. Like, oh my God, I'm so traumatized, I'm gonna need years of therapy for this. Oh, it's like, okay. Like I can, on the one hand, I can fully own it. Like people have different thresholds. Like something may be overwhelming to one person and might be to me. So I understand that, right? But one of the best ways, or like one of the best techniques I developed when I was working with this, and this was something that I developed when I was going through therapy and also when I was training as a coach, right, is to finish the sentence. Well, this is like the way I always explain to people when people say, hey, like I'm triggered. And I'm like, okay, finish that sentence. And you want to put the word into at the end of it. I'm triggered into something, right? I'm triggered towards something. And what's that going to be, right? Are you triggered towards a negative reaction? Are you triggered into you shutting down? Or are you triggered into positive action, right? And this is one of the most empowering ways that I shifted my perspective with this, where every single time that I would get triggered by something, or I would see something I was disheartened with, or I was upset with, or something didn't work for me, I took it as an opportunity for myself to say, okay, this is pointing me in a direction of where I want to go, right? This is giving me an insight of saying, hey, there's something here I don't agree with. There's something here that actually I think can be better. There's something that I'm seeing that there is a higher perspective to this, something that is more serving somebody or myself, right? And in doing so, by recognizing that, I'm saying, okay, yes, I'm acknowledging the trigger. I'm acknowledging that there's some pain. There's something that's happened. But I'm saying, okay, we're taking that. What are we now doing with it? Are we internalizing it? And am I going to just collapse? And am I going to, repress this and put it all the way down, and everything else is going to happen? And that's not really serving me, honestly. Or am I going to take it and am I going to allow it to redirect me and redirect my compass and say, hey, this triggered me because I want to create this, because I want to do this, right? It's triggering me into positive action, and then I can take it. And this is kind of, I don't want to say the esoteric meaning, because I'm like fabled for saying esoteric meanings and everything, right? It's like I feel like this is
mindfulness practice. Like it's like a mindfulness observation of it.
Yeah. It's like this to me is like the more mindful observation of it. I'm like, yeah, like you're saying, right? Where it's like it's a more empowering way of looking at the world for me, right? It's like, when are you going to be like, you're asking yourself that uncomfortable question of like, are you going to take accountability for your own triggers, right? Are you going to take accountability for what you are doing and how you're showing up in the world, and the fact that you are the one that's going to create your life, right? And it's like, or are you going to just sit there and expect everybody else to tread on eggshells around you and not trigger you? It's like, okay, if you're being triggered by stuff, that's an incentive for you to move, right? You need to start moving. It's an invitation to dance, right? Yes. And it's such an empowering concept for me. It's like, okay, yes, I'm triggered by something. I'm going to go create something. And like, and it's something that this was, for me, was inspired by something Cicero said. Like when I was reading Cicero's letters, and Cicero, for the people who don't know, is a very famous Roman letterist, Roman philosopher, one of the senators. And he said, I can't remember the exact quote now. It was like, never critique with words, critique with creations. It's like every time, or like if you want to critique somebody, create something better. Like don't waste your time with words or like ad hominem attacks or saying, hey, you triggered me, you're doing this, you're a horrible person. It's like, okay, if you are triggered by something, if you want to critique somebody that is doing something you don't agree with, go and create something better and show them through your action and through your ability to create that you are better than them, right? And it's like there is I mean, well, maybe you are better than them is the wrong wording, but it's like there is a sense of you're doing something more harmonious with your time.
Yeah.
Right.
And instead of just tearing something down, you're actually showing, well, if you did it like this, it could be better and it could serve others. It's even that I use the word better, but like dropping that better, but it's like it could serve. And maybe better is not the wrong word. It's like I'm not better than you because I went and created something different, or I'm not better.
Right. It's not in the sense of hierarchy, right?
Yeah, like I'm not trying to prove this person wrong or put them down, which I mean, like I want to come back to trigger and just like that's one of the issues I have with like in general in society. And like, you know, you guys are all awesome people out there in the world, but like I consistently hear people saying, oh, they said this and then I said this and I got them. You see that? Like I put them in their place. I got them, you know, or it's like, oh yeah, like I shut them down. And it's like, I got her, I got him, I got her, I got, and it's like all this getting each other, like proving you're right, proving you're better. It's like, what does that really do? It's pushing that same cycle that's been going on of division, of separation. It's like, okay, if you don't agree with somebody, it's like either you can go tune in somewhere else and go do something different, have a conversation with them and make a change, or, you know, like there's a number of options, but the idea of like, you've got to prove yourself better or got to attack somebody is this vibe that's out there. And what you just explained there was instead of using words to attack, instead of trying to catch them in their words or their lies or prove how much more intellectually witty you are, it's like go do something that helps the world and proves your point. Like, and like that's a thing too, like motivation behind things, like everything has intentions behind it. And like based on your motivations for something, like may or not be like I can get behind that too or agree with it, but at the same time the fact that you have motivation to do something, it's all based on like you and how you do it. It's like it's kind of the concept of like if I'm working with someone or like, you know, creating something and my goal is to help the world and make a difference in it, and their goal is to feed their kids and have money in their pocket, that's okay. I'm okay with that being your motivation. I'm okay with the motivation being you want money and want to have a successful life. Like that's also something people fall into. They're like, oh, at this job, I want to include these core values and be, it's like, that is true. And it's true for who you are, but you're going to work because you want money and you need money to survive. Like be honest about that. And I think that extra level of authenticness helps. And that's like, even like with the triggered thing, it's like people are using that word for offended. They're going, I'm triggered, I'm offended. And it's like, what's like, I think you did a beautiful job like breaking it down. It's like triggered into action, triggered into something. It's like triggered means something inside of you is calling a shift. Either like you emotionally need to shift. Something just happened that shook you out of your comfort zone. And whether or not you're going to, I like to use the terms like misfire or transmute, because like it's triggered, you're triggered. You're either going to misfire and shut down, get angry, go do all the disharmonic things that don't serve you, which if you choose to do that, that's okay. That's like, there's no wrong choices here.
Where you're at. Yeah.
It's where you're at. But it's like recognizing, oh, I misfired on that versus, oh, I transmuted that into action. I transmuted that into, you know, it comes back to that alchemy thing too of like, okay, I failed on something. Do I pick myself up again and keep going and do something about it? Or do I quit and be done with it? And like, that's the actual difference between failure and quitting. Failure is actually picking yourself up again and doing it again. Quitting is you've failed and then you don't do it again. That's quitting. So failure and quitting are not the same thing. But they could be viewed as options when triggered. Do you do something next, or do you shut down and not respond to anybody? You know?
Right. It's like it always reminds me of like the Edison quote that people always like give with the light bulb, where it's like Edison tried and failed like 2,000 times to create the light. I can't remember the exact number, right? But 2,000 times to create the light bulb. And when he asked why he didn't give up, he went, "Oh, I didn't fail. I just found 1,099 ways not to make a light bulb." And then like 2,000 times I succeeded. You know, it's like that's another way of like, again, shifting into like in coaching, we talk about like fixed mindsets and growth mindsets. Where it's like a fixed mindset is like, you know, you think you know exactly what the world is. And like, it's either this or it's that. And it's this kind of way where it's like, you are entirely encapsulated inside your own mindset and your own bubble. It's like, if you're at that place, it's fine. Like I can understand it, right? It's like a growth mindset is the best sort of explanation that I got given was by Jeffrey Allen at Mind Valley, he's a great energy worker. He's done a bunch of like energy work courses in Mind Valley. And I remember going through one of his courses, and he says this in one of his courses, where he goes, everybody thinks their beliefs are right and everybody is wrong, right? It's like, okay, yeah, I'm with you. It's like, there's a level of, I mean, it's a challenging thing where it's like, we have to like the what's the way of putting this? The move over to a growth mindset is not a comfortable move, right? Because growth isn't always comfortable. Like, again, we know from even from childhood, like to a certain extent, I think a lot of people have kind of, it's really funny to me that no one talks about this, but like from childhood, one of my like biggest experiences, because again, I'm 6'4" when I stand up, so I've done a lot of growing, right? I'm a very tall guy, right? It's like one of the things I struggled with before when I was growing up was growing pains, right? Like my bones and my body, like actually, like they hurt when I'm growing, right? And like it's natural for people, like when we're growing and our bones are growing or our teeth are moving out and there's like a new healthier tooth coming through, it hurts, right? When we're growing sometimes. And it's so interesting to me that nobody talks about that anymore, right? The fact that growth, even from our basic, like the natural, like even on a purely physical level, growth can be painful, right? And it's like nobody uses that as an example. Like I haven't heard that anywhere. It's like, oh well, do you remember when you were a kid and you were getting taller? It hurt because your bones were getting bigger, right? And you didn't run away from it. You didn't be like, oh, I'm you know, I'm in too much pain. I'm too triggered. My bones are growing too fast, right? You just put up with it. You got on with it. You knew that like you were growing and it was fine, right? And it's, I don't know, it's one of those things where I think the biggest enemy of growth is complacency for me, where it's like the like complacency is one of the biggest issues that I consistently see coming up every single time, where if we're comfortable, like there's no need for us to move, right? There's no inherent purpose that's saying, hey, something's not working. Like if we can just get by, if we're just about going, like we're happy enough, like we're not miserable, but we're okay, you know, that is single-handedly the biggest enemy to whatever your dream and whatever your manifestation is going to be, right? Because you're not ever going to take that move to break that comfortability and that complacency as long as you're comfortable. So, and Jordan Peterson talks about this, where he's like, there are only like a handful of ways that a person can really change. Like either they are inspired and moved by something so powerful and so emotionally evocative that they are obviously inspired to action, right? And this is all the like the civil rights movements, all the public movements, all this kind of thing. That's an example of that, right? Or 9 times out of 10, like the more common, but like some of the more common ones that happen is when the pain of being where you are outweighs that complacency or that comfortability, then people are motivated to change by that pain. Or in the more extreme kind of version of it, it's like if somebody goes through something that is so like irrevocably like breaking to them at the time, they then have to put themselves back together, right? And then by putting themselves back together, they eventually change, right? But the core message there that I always consistently tell people is like, you need a little bit of challenge, right? There needs to be a little bit of something there that's pushing you out of that comfortability. It's like you like it, and you hear about it in self-help cycles all the time, right? Where people are like, oh, you need to go outside your comfort zone, you need to push yourself a little bit. It's like, yes, but what does that actually mean? Like, what do we actually mean when we say go out of your comfort zone? Don't be comfortable, right? There's no
how do you build that pressure
right away?
It's building that pressure, and so not to cut you off. It's just like
no, go on.
It got me excited. I think it's like building that pressure, and it's like I'm reminded by a quote by well, it's by The Rock, by Dwayne Johnson, and I don't know where he got it from, but he's talking about like the idea of like, you know, in the island days of like from Voyager to Voyager, like if you wanted to take the island, if you were going to conquer the island and you were now going to live there, how do you live there? How do you conquer the island? You burn the boats you got there with. It's no longer a should, it's a must. There is no other option, you know? And so it's like that, like, how do you create pressure for yourself? And I'm not saying we're going to go conquer islands now or anything like that. Don't go do that with your life. Like those days are over. The conquering days hopefully are over, but do conquer your day energetically. But anyways, like but it's like that. How do you create that pressure for you in your life? How do you create that, like even the example of it's like, okay, I need to have a career change. Maybe you're like, I'm not happy in this job. I need to go apply somewhere else. And it's like, you can keep doing that and applying and looking, or you can quit your job. Now you have to find a new job. Now you have to find something new, because eventually bills are going to come due. And, I shouldn't say have to, but it's like, you have the choice of like, there's some pressure there, or if it's like, you're trying to quit sugar, you're trying to eat healthier. Yeah, then change all the stuff in your cupboards to not have sugary foods in there anymore. Don't have the Lay's chips and all the other things, and whatever name brand I can drop here to get defamed.
Demonetized.
No.
There you go.
But for all the high fructose corn syrup and sugar and all those things, if you want to change your diet, it's get them out of your house. If you leave them in there, yes, you can consistently make the mental choice to not partake of them and to not choose them. But it's easier if it's a must. If it's like, oh, if I wanted this super sugary whatever, I've got to go to the store. I've got to make this, and you can still do that. You still have the full choice to do that. Like.
But again, you're eroding that, I guess, comfortability or that ease, where it's like, if you don't remove it from the, like if we take the sugar example, if you don't remove the stuff from the house, then it's still a choice for you to wake up in the morning and get the sugar. It's like, you're still, even if you remove from the house, it's like, yes, there's still, like, even if you have to go to the store, there's still an element of choice there. It's like, sure, you could get up in the morning, you could go to the store if it really means that much to you. But it's like 9 times out of 10, what I found, if we take sugar as an example, or like use sugar as a metaphor for something, it's like, when you remove that and you sort of increase the distance that you have to go to get it, a lot of people realize that actually it's not really worth it for them to go and do it. It's like, when you're doing it, it's like, or like you put the thing back in the store, you put your sugar, whatever it is that we're talking about, your vice is, back in the store, and you increase your distance with it. It really makes you sit there and contemplate and think, is me going this distance actually worth it for getting that return? And you're going to realize very quickly that it's not, right? And then that's when your mindset's going to shift. You're like, okay, actually, like I can, like, hey, I want something sweet. I don't want to drive to the store. Hey, there's this apple or this plum or whatever it is on my shelf that I can take instead, right? And I'm getting the same, I'm getting the same sugar rush because there are sugars and fruits and stuff, right, as well.
Exactly. It's filling that same habit, that same dopamine. Right. And I'm using food as an example because it's like, and maybe
it's a good example.
It's a good example. And at least here in America, I find like a lot of us struggle with the sugar thing and also the high fructose corn syrup thing, and which does not need to be in anything. And I will die on that hill. I will fight that hill to my dying breath.
High fructose if you want natural sweetener, just use like natural honey or agave or whatever.
Natural honey or anything, like it doesn't need to be in anything. And if you think it needs to be in soda, you're wrong. Don't drink soda, but that's a different topic. This isn't a health thing. I'm getting sidetracked on health stuff, but like it's this example of like that, like just to make it a little bit more real. It could use that example of like trying to get each other or like emotional, whatever. Like even like that person that maybe you had like a weird tiff with, or whatever. How much energy is it going to take to continue that conversation versus either you saying you're sorry or just not continuing the conversation on? It's like, how much energy does it involve with people in your life? How much energy would it take to explain something? And I've gone through this with different people in my life, but like sometimes there's like this level of like, I could reach out to this person and we could have this very deep talk about this and we could really work it out. And then I'll realize, well, they're actually not in that state to do that. And if I was to reach out to them, it's going to turn into an argument. And that's just really not worth the energy, And the final example I'll use on this, just like, is changing your habits, changing your stuff. It's like being aware of like what you choose into, what you put your energy to, like making your life a must or a do. And I'm using like relationships as an example here, but it's like, it's that idea too, like even for myself, like with my own father and mother, it's like, I don't talk about spirituality with them. I don't talk about a lot of the deeper stuff that I'm into. I barely even talk about mindfulness practices or what I'm doing with my coaching clients, because in their world, it's just not going to make sense. Not that it's going to create an argument, not that it's going to create dissidence. It's not their terminology. They're just not going to understand. And so I'm going to have to spend hours explaining certain things of what I mean, which could be very wonderful, but it's all, at the end of the day, they're not invested enough to really hear it. And also it's going to be this much energy on me. So it's like, how much energy do you want to put into something? And I'm using this as an example for like in life, if you're trying to change something, you're trying to make your life a priority, like changing your shoulds into musts, to like stop shoulding all over your life and make it a must, or just accept that that's your priority. Accept your priority is, I want to choose this. I want to do this instead, you know, is usually the reason we don't do something or we lack on it is because it's not a high enough priority to us. Even if we say we want it really bad, it's not there. And like, this is slightly different topic, but just to like break down this zone, like that's one of the things I see with like the law of attraction. People going, I want this, I want this, I want my life to be this way. When you tell the universe you want something, you will get the feeling of wanting.
Yeah.
You will continue to want
it. This is the core issue that I often have with the law of attraction as well.
It's like, but if you want to be something, change how you be and how you do, and you'll be that. Like, I'm not saying everyone wants to go be a pro athlete, but if you think about a pro athlete, there are certain standards they hold their life to. You know, it's like they eat healthy because it makes them feel a certain way they want to. They work out every day because they know they want to perform the best in the game. And so it's like with our lives, with our law of attraction, with whatever you want in this life, you have to be willing to become that, to be that. And asking some of those, like, you know, like not as deep questions, but they can be like, I don't know, like I'm trying to think of the term here. Maybe it's lofty questioning or something like that, but it's like, why do I work out? Why do I drink water? Why do I care about this? And it's like, once you have that little bit of why, like then you do become that, you know? So like just using the example of working out again, like if you wanted to become a pro athlete, then it's like, oh, or, you know, you wanted to lift a bunch or change your body. It's like, oh, okay, well, what does somebody that lives that way do? How do they be? How are they being in the day to day? You got to shift your being and then you attract everything. That's like the real secret of the law of attraction is you shift you and then the world around you shifts. Not, I want $1 million. I can want $1 million all day long. And I will continue.
You're still going to be wanting $1 million.
Yeah, I'm still going to be wanting $1 million. But if I change mindset to a mindset of a millionaire, and how do millionaires think? How do millionaires handle stuff? How do millionaires approach their day? Once I learn that, then I'm changing me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it reminds me, again, it comes back to my favorite question. I ask this question so much. You probably already know what it's going to be, right? By saying, like, you can do it in both different ways, both directions. By saying yes to that thing, whatever it is, what are you also, well, what are you saying no to by doing that, right? And at the same time, or to reverse it on the other end, by saying no to doing that thing, what are you saying yes to? Right. And you have to then talk about and sort of think about that a little bit more. It makes you really think about, okay, yes, this isn't a priority, right? Or say, okay, so I'm not going to show up in this day. Like, I guess I want my $1 million. I want my amazing whatever it is, right? I want that next relationship, this kind of thing. But are you actually going to work on yourself? Are you actually going to put in the work to cultivate the correct mindset to actually make your body healthier, to get a good, you know, working job in place so that you have a stable support system, right? By saying no to all of those things, you're saying yes to the comfortability. But then at the same time, if you unpack that by saying yes to the comfortability and saying yes to the just okay, what are you also saying no to of all the other things that are coming along with that, right? And it's like, this is the same argument I often have with people who are like super deep into astrology. And like astrology is like a major like little like pain point for me, I'm gonna be honest, because like being an occultist and being like well-versed, at least I can say I'm well-versed in a lot of the more kind of traditional currents of things or historical currents of things, modern astrology really annoys me. I'm going to be honest with you. Right? I'm not going to quite go as far as saying like modern astrology is complete trash, because I think like if we go back to what we were talking about stoicism earlier or alchemy earlier,
just because it's a definition of what modern astrology is, just so people are.
That's a good point. Yeah. So modern astrology, it's probably easier to define what traditional astrology is actually. So traditional astrology is any astrology that is prior to 1700. basically. It's like 1700 AD. Modern astrology is a lot of the astrology, or like what most people, I would make the argument, think of when they think of astrology. Now it's any form of the astrology that is after sort of 1700 or 1900-ish, right? And the main core difference between the two is that a lot of modern astrology is focused on self-help and psychological evaluation, right? It's the planets are representative of concepts or feelings or things within ourselves, whereas traditional astrology is based more on making external predictions and things where you're saying, okay, this event is going to happen here, or here's the best time to take action, something that's going to be auspicious because you're lining up with certain cycles that are running through nature, right? Or certain cycles that are running on. It's not got a lot to do with your own personal psyche or your own personal kind of evaluation. And it's the challenge I have where like you can still use traditional astrology as a categorization system, right? If it helps you understand yourself and it helps you understand like how things are working, all this kind of thing, you can still use it and you're still going to get some value from it. But there's so much, at least to me, coming at it from an occultist perspective, there's so much that isn't talked about. There's so much that isn't actually, like, the depth is just completely gone there. They're like, I can't in full consciousness use that system respectfully. Whereas like there's so much missing from it. There's so much that people don't know and that people aren't using that like I can't bring myself to use it. You know, it's like it comes back. It reminds me of it reminds me of this other, I think Aubrey Marcus talked about this, where it's like something that you're doing, and it goes back to our other conversation a minute ago, actually, where if we're saying yes to something or no to something, and we're sort of taking on all of that kind of thing, it's like, even if you want, like, even if you're satisfied with that comfortability, right? Even if you're satisfied with where it is and you don't feel like you have to change, it's like, that's okay, right? It's okay, but just do it with full consciousness and full awareness that that's what you're accepting. Right? That's what you're settling for, right? Yeah. It's like, if you don't want to change, or you're not in a position to change, or you're not in a position to quit your job and go and get that new job and light that, you know, alchemical fire under your beaker, right? If you're not in a position to do that, that's okay. No one's here to make you and push you or anything like that. Like, you are completely sovereign in what you're doing, but just do what you're doing with full consciousness of what you're doing, right? Yeah. Like, be fully aware of being like, again, with astrology, all the people who are sitting there saying, oh, well, Mercury's now in retrograde, so my relationships are in a mess. Or, hey, Venus is in Aries or Scorpio, which are her detriments, right? The bad aspects to her. And then they're like, oh, okay, well, because Venus is now in Scorpio, I'm having relationship issues and I can blame it on the planet. You know, like, no, I hate to break it to you, you're having relationship issues and Venus is in Scorpio. There's not a correlation there. Like, you're seeing a correlation and a pattern. Like, there's no correlation outside of your own self. Unfortunately, I hate to break it to you, like, that isn't a thing in traditional astrology per se, right? It doesn't happen like that. My camera keeps going. There you go.
It likes to follow your face, like it likes to follow your hand.
Yeah, I'm realizing, because like it's activated by hand gestures. So when I put it on, like, because I am a naturally charismatic speaker, I'm using my hands. I activate my camera, so I'm just gonna like sit on my hands. There you go. Right.
No, I talk with my hands too. Like I just do, and it's like it's something so hard. I've never been able to get out of, and it's funny when I watch myself on the YouTube videos and my arms aren't in there, so like you just kind of see this motion going on,
like little things like that. Yeah,
and like you have no idea that my hands are like making these cool gestures that like mean nothing to anyone else but me.
It's great.
It's just how I am, and it's and so I can see how the thing.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's like a way to turn it off, but I can figure it out after this. We'll find out.
But it's not a big distractor, but like, just to use the astrology as an example there, like, so I'm understanding, so like for the relationship thing, it's like, yes, you're having issues in your relationship, and you know, Venus happens to be in Scorpio. Like, no, this is just like my understanding a little bit of like gravitational poles, and like from going into the physics, like you learn about astronomy in quite a way. And so like in that sense of like, well, yes, Venus's gravitational pull does create something to you, but like, you know, I'm gonna use this as an example of like, because I can't use this in a relationship one because I can't think of a good example, but like using Mercury retrograde as an example. Mercury retrograde messes up communication. So if you're having a hard time communicating with somebody, if I'm understanding traditional astrology right, you know Mercury retrograde is coming, that might be a good time to go have a conversation with somebody that you normally can't communicate with very clearly.
Right, because it reverses the energy.
Yeah, versus the, so you're
Reverses
choosing
it.
to step into like, okay, it reverses the energy. So it you know, if I had great communication, it might get bad with this person. But because with this person, it can get good because I normally have poor communication with them, or we have poor communication with each other, it might be a good time to go have a deeper talk. And so like, I guess that's my understanding is like just feeling into it, it's like, I guess the acceptance of like the planets do have a gravitational pull and they do affect us energetically in some way, but not to the degree that we want to give it to them. Because like that's what I hear a lot of it too, is it's like people want to give all their power away to the planets and be like, oh, I'm in Mercury retrograde, so that's why
So
my
my
computer's
life
not
is screwed.
working.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and I make that joke a lot. Like
Yeah.
whether Mercury retrograde is coming around or not, when I have technology issues, I'm like, oh, Mercury must be in retrograde. Like, I'm purely joking because I'm actually not giving my power to
It's pure
Mercury.
satire, but people take it seriously.
They take it
That's
so
like
seriously.
the weird thing for me.
Like what I'm really saying is like, oh, the gremlins inside my computer are messing up.
Yeah.
Like that's really what I mean. Like I don't believe in it anymore.
Yeah.
But I'll come back to gremlins in a minute because I have a funny story about gremlins. But the lost and found gremlins is what I'll tell a story about. But and that's just my personal belief system. But different thing is like, yeah, so like if I'm understanding astrology a little bit, it's like not giving our power away to something in the traditional astrology, but being aware that it does play a role, but not as this heavy role. Like, like yes, the Earth's gravity keeps me here, and the moon's gravity causes the waves. And yes, on a full moon, I might be a little bit more emotional spike because I have emotion, like the body's made of water, and so my emotions might get a little spiked. But if I go out and I'm not going to do this anyone, but if I went out and murdered somebody on the moon, that's not.
I mean, it would be the perfect date for it. To be fair, like
I'd follow along with all the statistics.
Here's the thing, right? If you look at the statistics, the murder rate is the highest on the full moon.
Yeah, no, that's why I chose that thing. I was like, I'm not going to murder anyone, but like, if I did, I can't really blame the moon. I can't be like the moon made me do it.
It's not a defense in court that's going to hold up. Yeah, guys, I think
the moon made my wife angry, and that's why we're arguing. or sorry, Jupiter made my wife angry, and so now, or made my boyfriend mad, and now we're breaking up. It's all Jupiter's fault.
Yeah,
like it doesn't quite work.
The lack of that personal accountability to it. Yeah,
but this is the same thing. Like, and not bashing Christianity in any way, but it's like it's one of those things I have a hard time too. And when you give your power away to something beyond yourself and say this thing will save me, this thing is causing this in my life, versus that may exist. It may be causing it. It may have a ripple effect, but I myself have the power. Yeah.
Right. And this is something else I'm going to put a pin in this. I'm going to come back to that because I have a lot to say about like the deliverance ministries in the US and other Christian stuff. But one thing I want to get to before that is the
astrology.
Stick on astrology for a moment here. Right. I'm going to pick you up on one thing. Right. This is great. I love being able to do this because I love having a platform to be able to talk about this.
And by all means, like I'm always open to like be questioned on anything I hear and believe, because everything is a theory still to me.
Right. So here's the challenge we have with it. Right. And you use the example there of saying that the planets or like the astrology works through something like gravitational waves. Right. That like the planets are moving through a vacuum, or that they're sending these gravitational waves. And it's an example that I've seen a lot of people use, and it's something that a lot of modern people use, where they will either say that the effects of astrology are mediated by some material or energetic sort of version of things, right? So they'll say, oh, well, yeah, how like if you sit there and you ask the basic question, right, to an astrologer, you say, okay, well, how do the planets, who are millions of miles away in space, how do they affect us down here? Like, how does it act? Like, what's the actual mechanics behind how that works? And here's the challenge with it. If you ask any modern astrologer how they work, they'll give you that answer. They'll give you some variant of materialistic or materialist answer, where there's a material cause for it happening, as in rooted in cause and effect, right? That the planets are producing some kind of electromagnetic wave, they're producing some kind of gravitational anomaly, or that they're somehow sending sort of rays of energy down to Earth that our bodies are then picking up on, right? Here's the challenge with that assumption. It's entirely a materialistic explanation, right? It's entirely rooted in cause and effect, and it's entirely a product of the Western mindset of saying material first, that the material spirit results from matter, right? Or consciousness results from matter. Because what we're doing there is we're effectively saying that there's not actually a spiritual cause for how the planets are affecting us, or there's a non-material cause for how the planets are affecting us. We're looking for a material scientific explanation for how the planets are doing that. And the challenge you have with it is that astrology is not a material system. Yeah. So you're never going to be able to prove that empirically. You're never going to be able to actually like understand astrology in at least in the traditional sense of the word. Yeah. If you're looking for a materialist explanation for how the effects in the planets are actually happening. Yeah. And it's a thing that every modern astrologer does, and it's a real shame because it signals sort of how deeply embedded sort of this Western materialist paradigm has become in how we're viewing the world. Where if we go back to traditional astrology, it's completely the other way around. It's completely reversed, where matter, or the physical world that we see, and all of the effects in the physical world, including this cause and effect thing that is so powerful in modern science, right? Or the materialist explanation of things, all of that is the end stage of the product, right? It's the end stage of the emanation. It's actually the reverse way round, where in fact, everything results from spirit. Everything results from a non-material version, and materiality is the final stage or the final culmination of those spiritual forces sort of embedding themselves in a body. And the best way to explain this is to cite Plato with this, because when you look at any of Plato's dialogues, especially if we're looking at things like the Timaeus or any of the ones where he's talking about sort of cosmology and the soul and all this kind of thing, one of the things I always like to tell people, and even some modern academics have made this mistake, Plato has no word for matter. There is like the word matter does not exist in Plato's vocabulary at all. And the closest word that we think about, so the word he uses for physical stuff or material stuff in Greek is soma, which is body, right? So when he's talking about physical things in the world or like material things, he calls it the body, right? He says it's the body because it's the body of the world soul. It's the body of the ideas, or it's the body of the spiritual concepts that he's talking about in his chain, right? There's no concept of matter in that sense, right? And it's an issue that even modern academics make, where they actually translate, some of them have translated soma as matter, right? It's like, what the problem with that is that if you're doing that, you're imposing like a later metaphysical notion onto Plato that he didn't have any idea about. He did not, like Plato in the ancient Greek world, there was no distinction between sort of the physical world and spirit. The physical world was just the body for spirit, right? It was two things entirely conjoined together. And if you're trying to translate it as matter, it doesn't work, because you lose that sort of flow, that continuum that he creates. And it's a real shame, right? And this is where sort of traditional astrology is really, really helpful when we're trying to understand the planets, because in order to understand how traditional astrology works, or how sort of the historical astrological system works, you need to understand the Platonic worldview. You need to understand, because Plato really is at the core of most of Western like stuff. If you have been involved in any Western religion or any form of Western spirituality, you have done something from Plato in any kind of way, even if it's just like watered down, diluted a little bit. So to give you sort of an immediate crash course, like to summarize as best I can, imagine that the number of minds in the universe is one, that there is only one single mind in the universe, which is the monad, right? It's the oneness. There is only one single consciousness in the entire universe, which is this universal oneness that is inherently good, right? It's the good, if anything. It's the one, the transcendent being of all things, right? And then in order to know itself and come to know itself, that one divides into plurality. And it spreads itself across over every single layer of reality, from plants and minerals and humans and animals and every single thing. And there is a caveat in this, and I've talked about this in some of my classes. It's really interesting. If you think about how we react to, or how we contemplate or understand things, it's always in relation to each other, right? The only way we can understand this is here and this is here is by understanding that both of these exist. So when you zoom out into a much, much broader kind of 5D perspective, you realize that in actuality, what we're perceiving as duality are actually one and the same thing. because you need one thing to perceive the other in the same way, right? No single thing exists in isolation. Every single thing in this universe exists in connection, in relation to something else. And the caveat, or the hidden truth in that, is that even though the one divides into the dyad and the one divides into the two-ness is still actually one. It's still part of that overarching oneness, because it's still existing within the one, inside of that paradigm, right? And this is even what Pythagoras ultimately figured out, right? Where he's going up through the different number scales. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the second you get to 9, it just resets, right? And it goes back to 1. It's just another or like another layer of 1, right? It's the 10, right? But ultimately, again, we can go into different things. Go down Parmenides' route. There's no such thing as 0, because in order to speak of something, you have to speak of something that exists.
Yes.
You know, so there's actually no such thing as 0. Like if we're talking about 0 as a concept, then it does, like, that we're talking about something.
I'm
right?
talking about something. 0 doesn't.
Right.
No,
so
I
0
understand that. Yeah.
Right.
0 doesn't exist because you're talking about 0. Yeah.
Right. And there's something there. Right. And again,
which is a whole thing to, like, we'll come back to this, but like spiritual things in general, it's like sometimes when you point out that a spiritual miracle is happening, it ceases.
Yeah.
It's like when you call attention to
the second that you sort of get into that kind of like perception,
that mental, material first, spiritual second. And that's even what I didn't realize, like, even as me explaining, like, you know, like me understanding like astrology and like, oh yeah, like the gravity doesn't affect, like, yeah, that does come from modern astrologist explaining the gravity thing to me. But that also comes more from like me being in physics going, okay, in physics, this means this. And like my whole exploration into physics, like, it did come from plant medicine. Like plant medicine told me to go study physics. I thought it told me to go get a degree in it, but it told me to go study it. Wow. So I spent a lot longer studying physics than I was originally prompted to.
I have a funny story about physics as well in a minute. Actually, it's not a funny thing. But I went through a phase of getting deep into it.
But no, by all means, like, if you want to share that now, you can, or we can come back.
We can circle back because it's somewhat related, right? But sticking on astrology real quick here.
Astrology.
So if we think, there's the mind, right? And the mind divides into the plurality or into the dyad. And the dyad is actually, even though from our perspective, we perceive it as a dual. So even though we perceive duality as something that exists, the fact that you need one thing to understand another implies they are connected in a single thing, which means it is inherently oneness, right? There is an inherent sense of connectiveness in the entire universe. And the best way I can kind of explain this is actually to use, it's a Plato that doesn't use it directly in the Timaeus, but the translator, or like one of the biggest translators of the Timaeus, does use it in his commentary. And it's the analogy that Eric Peffig gives with white cells and red cells, right? It's that same thing, which I love. But if you, like, the best way I can explain the relationship, to sort of give you a visual image of it, is your body right now, what you are perceiving as your physical body, is a collection of 50 trillion cells, right? Each individual singular cell that is self-contained and has its own sort of mitochondria and all these different kinds of things, right? But even though we are, like, there is an individual cell, we are made up collectively of 50 trillion cells. So then it begs the question, are we our cells or are we our body? And then what is it that makes us us? Because there is something that's unifying the cells, and every single cell is acting in unison in relation to another cell, right? And now imagine if we blow that up on a universal scale, imagine we are the cells of the universe, right? We are the 50 trillion cells, or however many things there are in the universe, however many life forms there are, all of which are a part of this greater being's body, right? Or rather the greater being's mind, if you want to think of it like that, right? But we are, in the same way that all of our cells make up us and our consciousness, or our body and our experience, we make up the experience of the universe, right? And like Plato defines it as the one, right? Or that one singular mind, exactly. And the sole purpose of this one mind, right, and the intellect, so to speak, the conscious awareness of the universe, right? So if we imagine all of the cells, or us, and all things in the universe are the cells of the universe, the planets maybe are the organs, for example, if we're conceptualizing the universe as a body, right? The entire purpose, or the mind, or the entire purpose of the mind of the universe is to do what minds do, which is think. Right, the entire purpose, or like if we imagine that if we are the cells, nature itself, and this is one of, and we find this even in the Hermetica, and it's also a very Jewish idea as well. You find it in some esoteric Jewish stuff like in Kabbalah, where there is actually no distinction between God and nature. People think, oh, nature is animated by God, or nature is separate to God, or whatever, or God is in some kind of faraway cloud somewhere, right? It's like, actually, if you look into all of, like, the deeper you go into esoteric stuff, the more you realize that actually there is no distinction. Even then thinking, oh, there's Mother Nature and then there's God, or Mother Nature and Father Sky and all this kind of thing, right? In reality, if you go deeper and deeper into esoteric concepts, you realize that nature and God are inseparable because they are one and the same thing. Nature itself is the body of God, or whatever you want to call it, right? And it's interesting because I know there are people who have like religious trauma around using the word God, right? And it's such an interesting concept to me because, like, even though people don't like using the word God, in spiritual communities, they'll still use the word spirit or universe, which is, when you think about it and unpack it, it's still a monotheistic paradigm, right? You're still saying there is a singular creator, or so a singular force in the universe that is providing for you in some kind of way. So that's still monotheistic in that way, even though people have that trauma around using the word God, because especially if they come from Christianity or whatever.
Well, and I think just real fast there, I think the trauma, at least for myself, like being raised hardcore Christian, and I don't have a problem with the word God anymore or anything like that, but my issue with it was that fact that God felt separate from me.
Right.
That God was this other physical being that existed apart from me, and God like was not one with me. And so like the universe gave me, or source gave me, that terminology and that real feeling of oneness, of like, even though this divine source, like, I am God, you are God. Like like, I'm not perfect, nor are you, but like, that doesn't mean that I'm not some aspect of God. Like, that God's not this separate man in a cloud, you know, or this separate woman in a cloud, you know, doing the thing, judging me or deciding or loving me from afar. You know, it's the fact of like, there is a oneness. In order for me to identify a divinity source, there's now two of us, but like, it's still the oneness. I'm identifying there's a divinity source that does love me unconditionally and comes through me sometimes. Or is coming through me right now, however you want to look at that, you know. So like, what layer do you want to put it on? But it's like, in that aspect, you know. But yeah, so please continue on that. But yeah, it's like, I think that trauma comes from that actual belief that
there's a sense of separation.
Separate. And so the adoption of universe is like, oh no, we're all one. And it's like, that's a big awakening to realize that. And I think
absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's one of those interesting things where I really like Plato's word. Like, the word that they use for it is either en in Greek, which is one, or like pan, which is all. Right? Like, they're the two words that Plato or a lot of the Greek philosophers use. They'll go between all and they'll say, okay, we're talking about the one, or we're talking about the all. Right? It's like, even when you dive into things like Hermeticism, like the core kind of like maxim, or the core kind of like quote that defines Hermeticism in Greek is entropan, which is the one in all, right? Or the other all in the other way around, the all in one, right? Or like the core thing that defines all Hermetic belief is the one is in the all and the all is in the one, right? Like, that's like the quote that defines all of Hermeticism when you like dive into like the Corpus Hermeticum and all these kind of things, right? It's like the underlying current things. But yeah, so if we think, so going back to that real quick, so if we think that we are all the cells, if you want to think like that, in, or even you could say cells, you could say even thoughts in the mind of God. If we imagine God inherently, or what this oneness is a mind ultimately, because if we think everything ultimately comes from the mind first and foremost, it's like, and I use this example the other day, it's like, people really overcomplicate Plato's philosophy. They're like, oh, he's really dense, it's all this kind of thing. It's like, okay, if you were to really distill it down to something practical, the core of Plato's idea is this idea of ideas and forms. And it's like, I have an idea about what I want a cup to look like. Then I go and make a cup based off of the image in my mind, right? But there are a million different ways to make a cup. So I can change how this looks, I can change the aspect, I can change the shape, I can change the size, whatever it is. But it's never truly, and again, if you really expand it and you think about the ideas, something is never really as good as we picture it to be, right? Like, our imagination, our mind is perfect in this kind of way, because we can imagine something, we can create something so profound and so clear, an image, right? The paradigm or the archetype of that thing, right? The paragon of ultimate whatever it is. Like, I can think about the ultimate best cup ever, But then when I go and try and make it, I'm limited by material things like space, time, finances, all this kind of thing. That means I'm not really going to be able to deliver my vision truly, but I'm going to be able to give the best approximation. I'm going to be able to give the best, I don't know, construction, the best material version based on that idea, right? That's basically Plato's philosophy. Now take all of that and imagine that God or the oneness did the same thing with the universe when it created all things and created us, right? In like the ideal spiritual form of the universe exists within the mind of God in this sense, or the mind of the oneness. And it then hands things off. That core mind inherently, well, if we're being super specific, there's the transcendent one, which is like the overarching oneness, and then the first emanation, the first collection like becomes conscious of the one is the mind, which is the nous, right? So like the first emanation, like there's the actual thing itself, and then the first time that it becomes conscious is its first emanation, which is the mind. And so the universe is its mind. So it's like, yes, the universe is mind, but also the mind is still the first emanation of that further one that exists, right? Like there's pure consciousness, like pure oneness. And the first stage that comes from that is the awareness of that oneness. And then all of our reality comes from that awareness, ultimately. Yeah. So you're having that, right? And like, so the core, like the only job of the universal mind, of that universal oneness, is to think. And it's to think ideas into being, right? It's to think, hey, I want to create a planet today. Or rather, you're thinking about concepts. And Plato argues that it's thinking about the virtues, right? So like the inherent beauties and things and inherent concepts. So we're talking about like archetypes of things. So justice, love, truth, wisdom, these inherent concepts that exist that underlie the current of the entire material, or the current of the entire universe, right? These core basic concepts that it's thinking into action. And the way you can kind of think about it is it creates, or it thinks these forms into existence, and they're kind of like diagrams, right? They're kind of like blueprints. And then the next emanation further up, so like the next thing that the mind then gives out is actually the demiurge, believe it or not. And this is really interesting because the Gnostics took this concept of the demiurge and they completely bastardized it, right? They completely changed it because they said that it was like this ignorant evil being, or he was either ignorant or an evil being. But the demiurge isn't actually Gnostic originally, it's a Platonic concept. And in Plato's version of things, the demiurge, or the artificer, so the maker, right, is actually a positive force. It's a good thing. It's just a craftsman. It's literally what it means, like demiurge, like demiurgos in Greek, it literally just means like craftsman or maker, right? And its entire job is to look at those blueprints that the divine mind is thinking up, and then it's to start moving material things together in line with those blueprints, to start making stuff, right? And the core idea is that as long as the demiurge is looking to the divine blueprints, or as long as he's like working off of those forms, because those forms are inherently beautiful, they are inherently good, and they are inherently perfect, then the things he creates will inherently be perfect because he's following those perfect blueprints. But where things get a bit lost is like the only material that the demiurge has to work with is the limitation material, right? It's the matter kind of material. So he can only give the best approximation of a concept. He can only give the best approximation of his blueprint that he's using, which is what he uses to then create the material world. So it's like the material world is modeled off of a divine blueprint, and we can see this in things like sacred geometry and the phi ratio, pi, all these different things, right? It's all these different ratios and numbers where it's like this kind of source code. It's there because it's like the blueprint that the creator ultimately was following is just that. It's a diagram effectively of how you make a universe, right? And you do it and he makes it, but because he can only make it based off of what he has available, it's only the best kind of image or the best approximation of the ideal form, right? It's not the perfect version because he can't get the perfect version because he himself is not 100% divine necessarily, right? And then right down at the very end of that, he's creating all this other stuff, and then our bodies get created from those base elements, right? The water, the fire, the earth, the air, all that kind of thing. Whereas our consciousness and our sense of reason comes from the one. In fact, it is the one, right? It's one of the cells of the one, but it comes to know itself because it inhabits a body. And that body is inherently founded or created from the material gross elements of things, which is inherently limited, right? There's a limited amount of perception that we can do. But to Plato and all those ancient philosophers, the entire purpose of our lives is to align ourselves to the good. It's to align ourselves back to that one and spend our life in pursuit of understanding those perfect forms, like understanding those images and those perfect things. As we do that, we align ourselves closer to the one or to the good, which is inherently good in and of itself. And we align ourselves to the virtues. And the virtues are, again, those thoughts like love, wisdom, justice, all that kind of thing. And by aligning ourselves to them, we then beautify the world even more, right? We elevate the world more and more because we are embodying the concepts that are from the mind of the oneness, right? That are universal in all things. But when you think about that at its sort of core level, it's like you can kind of split reality into three worlds, effectively, or three like layers, if you want to think about it. Is you have the divine world at like the very, very top, which is like the world where the makers are, right? The world where that oneness is, or what the world where the mind is. That's kind of overlaying on all these sort of upper echelons of things. Then going down, you have the sphere of the fixed stars, or the planets, right? Which is space, more or less. And that's where all the planets are. And then when you get down to below the planets, then you have what's going on inside the planets, which is Earth and the material reality. And this is what Agrippa, so Cornelius Agrippa, who's one of the best Renaissance magicians, he divides this up very well. He's like, yeah, there's a divine world, which is the world of the ideas. There's a celestial world, which is the world of the planets. And then there's the material physical world, which is the natural world we're in here.
Yeah.
Right. And that inherent worldview, even just understanding that chain of causality, understanding like that's the way ideas flow and all that kind of thing, it's vital to understanding astrology, because then you understand what the planets are, right? So if we trace back, or we take one example, let's say justice, right? Or the idea of laws and justice is the core example I can think of, right?
Yeah.
You have the ideal form of justice, right? Which is the idea of justice, which is that perfect justice that exists. That Platonic idea, that image in your mind, is then manifest on the celestial level as Jupiter, right? Jupiter is that idea of justice, healthy father energy, all that kind of thing that is embodied within that sense of fairness, ruling well, justice, making sure everyone's provided for, everyone has good allotments, everyone has a good amount of financial stability, all that kind of thing, because it's justified, right? That embodies in the celestial world as Jupiter. Then down on the material world, on our physical world, that idea is embodied as laws and courts and judges and financial prosperity. And this is like one of the things that I always like to correct people on, is people like, it's very quick when people are getting into like occultism for the first time and they're learning about spell casting, and they go, oh, well, yeah, I can just use Jupiter to manifest some finances, right? It's like, you can, like, that is the correct quote unquote like association to use, but you're kind of missing the point if you're only seeing it as financial, right? The entire idea that Jupiter is embodying is that sense of abundance, right? It's that sense of provision and that sense of justice, that everyone has what they need to live their best self and be their best self and being in abundance. It just so happens that in our current society today, that's financial. Right? In order to do that, you need to have a level of finances. So when you approach Jupiter and you say, okay, I need abundance, I need to have this sense of justice, or I need a just provision for myself, that then takes the form, when the result manifests, if you're doing a ritual with Jupiter, that result takes the form of financial abundance, right? The money starts flowing in when you work with Jupiter, not because Jupiter is in any way associated with money, but because its core idea, like the core energy behind Jupiter, is that idea of abundance and provision. It just so happens that abundance and provision in our modern day society is financial, because that's what we need to survive right now. If you had done the same ritual 2,000 years ago when you were starving, you might have got an abundance of food. It's like, doesn't make food associated with Jupiter any more than money is. You're working with the core idea and the core archetype, right? And then you apply that to all the other planets effectively, right? And then I suppose there is an extra little layer as well, where like, if we take Jupiter again, in the physical world, that idea and that energy manifests as judges and laws and all this kind of thing. And then on the personal level, it manifests as our perception of justice, right? Our perception of abundance, or our perception of what a good law is, what it means to hold ourselves well, right? Speak with honor and all that kind of thing, or look after people, right? There's a personal element to it. And this is what I always talk about, where even in astrology, we have our own, like, yes, there are the external planets, but we also have our internal planets as well. And we have our, like, how the ideas internally resonate with us as well. And like, it's how we are connecting to that core Platonic idea that's way up there in the chain of being, right? Yeah. And that's really the core. So again, if you then apply that to every other planet, and like all the like associations are intuitive. Mars is about passion and a bit of progression, all this kind of thing. Mercury is about knowledge and wisdom. Venus is love, all that kind of thing. All of it is echoing the core ideas in the mind, right? Like the core thoughts ultimately. And again, you can think of planets as thoughts, right? They're like solidified thoughts. It's like, when you understand that's kind of the worldview behind traditional astrology, right? It's like, it's not that the planets are affecting you per se. It's not the planets to bring it back to like what we started this conversation with, right? It's not that the planets are like themselves sending some gravitational wave that affects you because the planet has some inherent virtue itself. It's that the idea embodied within, oh wow, it's zooming in. What the hell was that? Oh wow, oh no, I don't like that. That was weird. I'm doing like, yeah, I was like, weird. I don't know how that happened. Okay, I need to figure out how that works. But there you go.
Put both together back together and try to make it like.
Oh look, if I do this, I'll like try and go back. Wait, I might have a way. Hold on, let's.
Sorry, that was pretty.
It was really like mid. Hold on, I can open up the camera controls real quick. Here you go. Yeah. And then where is my zoom? Wait, does that just like keep zooming in if I keep doing that? Oh, there you go. Okay, right. Go back. There we go. Okay, I can open the thing. That was really weird. I got like.
I mean, it was a good dramatic effect. Like if you
wouldn't
have said anything, it would have been like,
yeah. I just realized as well, for people who are listening to this and aren't watching it on YouTube, that's going to sound really weird. But people who are only listening to this, my camera just activated and zoomed in straight on my face while I was speaking. So it was a very dramatic effect. There you go. Where was I? What was I saying? Yeah. So to sum up that whole very long-winded story, ultimately, it's not that the planets themselves have any inherent virtue that they're affecting you. It's that the idea that the planet embodies is also resonating with the internal idea that you're embodying at the same time. It's not that one's necessarily affecting the other, because like, again, that's that chain of causality that is material when you think about it, like if you're using that as an explanation. So the level to it that exists is a little bit different, right? Or the conception is existent. And then if we bring in what's the guy's name? Another Renaissance philosopher who I am a very big fan of, Pico Mirandola. And he wrote a lot of things for people who don't know. He wrote 900 theses on magic and all these different kind of philosophical concepts. And he is an absolute amazing person in history. I love him so much. But he also wrote a speech that kicked off the debate called The Oration on the Dignity of Man. And it's arguably, it's a speech that embodies the humanist sort of philosophy of the Renaissance. And he makes this really cool argument where he's talking about this whole chain of being that exists between the mind and the ideas, the planets, and then us. And he goes, one of the things that gives humans our essential dignity, the thing that makes us so divine, because again, if you think, if we backtrack a second, when a soul is incarnating and when a soul is coming into a physical body, if we take the assumption it's coming from the divine mind, right? It's an emanation of the divine mind. It comes part, again, if you think of this as the astral body, right? And again, Plato invented that concept, right? We have this discussion, astral projection and moving the astral body. That's Platonic. Plato invented the astral body, right? It's the body of the celestial sphere of the planets. So as your soul, or your intellect even, is incarnating into the body, it passes by every single planet, right? It passes by every single sphere, or it goes through every single sphere. And as it does, it takes on the qualities and attributes of that sphere. But notice that we don't belong to any one sphere. We're not constituted entirely of one element or entirely of one planet. We're constituted of pure reason and pure consciousness, which is the one. So Pico then makes this argument that the thing that gives humans our essential dignity, the thing that makes us different from everything else, or all the animals and the other things and the minerals, that kind of thing, or even different from spirits, right? Spirits are associated with different planetary spheres. The thing that makes us different is that we're not entirely created from one planet. We're not entirely created from one place. We partake of everything and everywhere, which means that as well, we're also not bound by any one thing. Right? We exist, yes, like we have a place in the natural order, but we also exist outside of the natural order, and we can move between it at will, right? And where the core message of this comes in is it also means you are not at the mercy of whatever one idea is doing at one time, right? Whatever one planet is doing at any one time, it's not a deal breaker, right? It can, like, the idea will resonate. And again, it might trigger something in you, it might create a movement in you, but because you're not constituted of that single essence, you aren't bound to act with whatever that planet's doing. You can choose a different direction, right? You can be like, okay, I can see this theme might be coming up for me. I can see this idea might be coming up for me, but I can direct myself more towards this way. I can direct myself, I have an active free will choice to say, hey, I can acknowledge this is happening, but I'm not going to take that on. Right? I'm not going to attach meaning to that. Instead, I'm going to focus on this other aspect of the idea instead, right? And where we put your awareness or your focus is the thing that really comes into being. And that's kind of the very long-winded way of me saying you're not at the mercy of planets, right? Yes, there might be a slight resonance there, but it's not a case of just saying, okay, well, Mercury's in retrograde, Venus is in Scorpio, whatever it is, my entire life is screwed. It's like, no, you can move between, right? You have your soul as an essence is inherently made up of every single thing there. It's not bound to any one sphere. So you can move in different directions. So it's something that annoys me a little bit. Like when people are like, oh, it's a new astrological season, so therefore, I'm acting differently, right? It was like, oh, it's a new astrological season, so now I'm a different person. It's like, no, you're still kind of a narcissist, unfortunately. Yeah.
Or whatever it might be, I mean, it's like you're still you. Like,
yeah,
we do have multiple sides of ourselves, and we are continuing to grow and adjust. But like you said before, like there's only those core reasons of why we change, really are what it comes down to, and even all of this, like I appreciate the deep dive on traditional astrology, because like I caught myself going like, oh, this is good stuff. And I was like, because that's the thing, is like at that level, in a simplicity way, like in a lot of ways, like as in depth as that was and very explanatory, it's still a very like simplistic way of like, this is why this works this way. And even then, like traditional astrology, and this is just my belief system, like it's still a permission slip you can subscribe to.
It's still a categorization system ultimately.
It's something you can subscribe to, believe in, and go with, but and if you do, like, then these are the ways to move through it and not be subject to it. Because like that's the thing, like in all your spiritual practices out there, of everybody's, whatever belief system is you subscribe to. And I use that word subscribe because like you're choosing into that, and then you're adopting that. And for me, like when I said earlier, like everything's a theory to me. I mean, there are things that I core believe that are part of my core beliefs that like I will debate, or like would, you got to convince me pretty deeply to shift on that.
Yeah.
But those are things that like I've researched enough or had personal experiences that have gone, okay, yeah, I adopt that. That's part of my core belief, and like, just for an example that, hopefully most people hold this, and it's okay if you don't, but it's like, I don't find there ever to really be a reason to be screaming at somebody unless it's a life or death situation. Like, and maybe I don't hold that fully to my core, but I hold it pretty close. Like, I just can't justifiably see a reason to angrily be yelling at each other unless you're trying to save a life, unless you're trying to like, or you're defending your life. Now, I'm sure there's someone out there in the comments will come up with an example and we'll put it in there, and like we'll shatter them. That's fine. But like, that's what I mean. Like in general, like in my house, like me and my wife and our dogs and so forth, like there's a certain decibel we never get above. And decibel in an angry tone, like we make funny noises, we sing, we get loud, we laugh, but there's a certain angry decibel we never get above. And it's because like we know what that vibration brings in the home. We know how it makes us feel. I know how I feel when I get yelled at, and I know how I feel when I do yell. Like So part of my core belief is I don't, that's a very, that's not a super deep thing, but it's like, it's still there. Like, so that's what I'm saying. Like any spiritual belief you adopt out there, it's like, once you adopt it, it's like, is this part of my core belief enough that I am going to lean into it, that it dictates how my life is?
Yeah.
As well as then also, hold to that value as long as it serves you, but challenge it often enough, or look at it often enough, question it often enough to see if it still serves you, if it's still working for you, if it's still something you believe, because even in like the concept, just explain it, like with the traditional astrology and going into that, it's like, well, if you believe that and it's serving you and it's working for you, then like it is a truth, and it is part of the capital T truth, which is everyone's perspective, because it's working for you and serving. And also, granted, there's lots of research that backs up a lot of these things, and even in that concept there, like with Plato, like we'll dive on him for a moment, but like that example there of like Plato, like, did he invent astral body, or did he discover it and invented the term for astral body? Because and I'm using that as a very simple example, because it's like in this belief system, or in this permission slip of traditional astrology, that's one that carries over into other belief systems, that other belief systems talk about the astral body, talk about the astral realm, even in Kabbalah, or even in shamanism, and different things. And so it's like, oh, interesting. Now, the term astral body, he probably coined that, he probably is the one that came up with it, but also he gave a name for something that so many people didn't have a word for, didn't have a name for, like in shamanism, like if you were to talk about astral projection, like nowadays, when that gets brought up to shamans down in South America, they know what you're talking about. They've heard it enough times, they know. But when that was like first kind of introduced to them, they're like, what are you referring to? Oh, you mean the shamanic realms? You mean when you leave your body? You mean like the realm of the ancestors? Like, and even then, that's like 3 different realms to them. But
Well, this is another interesting
dropping your
point.
body. The idea of
Yeah, this
dropping
is a
your
really
body.
interesting point that I'm noticing now. It's like, oh, something like last thing you said that's pretty interesting. I could be wrong, because again, I haven't gone deep into shamanism, so if you might know more than I do about this. It sounds like there's not like, to them, there's almost not a distinction between, like, for us, when we say, oh, I'm astral projecting, all right, or I'm doing this, like, it's a very clear kind of practice, or a very clear paradigm of saying, okay, I'm in my body, which is my normal state. And then when I'm outside of my body, it's a non-normal state, right? It's an abnormal state where I'm actively projecting my consciousness. Whereas something I've seen in some traditional sort of shamanic circles is there's really not that distinction. It's just like, okay, I'm in my body, I'm out my body. Like it's that I'm not my body. So it's like it's not there's not that kind of weird debate of saying, okay, here's my normal phase of consciousness, here's my abnormal phase. It's just like, okay, I'm in my body, I'm at my body, I'm traveling. It's like, it's almost, it's treated with no difference than just getting up and going for a walk. I was like, okay, I got up for a walk and I just didn't take my body with me this time. It's fine.
It's very similar to that. Like, and of course there's like, there's there's a little bit deeperness obviously too, but it is similar to that, where like there's not as many constraints. There's not as many like this. And I think that comes from like the way we're taught, like the way we were raised. And this is not directly on shamanism, but like even like something Matthias Stefano talks about is like he's someone that can remember his past lives and like, believe what you want to believe. But he brings up the concept of like that in the land of Chem, that they had instruments that could carve stone with water. We don't believe that because of the way we're taught and raised in society, that's not possible. The technology like that you couldn't have technology that could carve stone and ride a donkey at the same time. Like we're taught that couldn't possibly exist. So then thus it doesn't. Like, but in the shamanism world, and I'm distinctly speaking of like the areas around Machu Picchu or Pucallpa, like the Shipibo tribes and the Quechuan tribes, and Quechuan kind of spreads out through the whole country, but distinctly in Quechuan is really where I'm leaning in here. And that's like what I've learned the most of. But it's like, even in that tradition, it's like there is a belief of like kind of the separations of the world, but it's like the idea that there is somebody in your village, or that there are people in your community that can, with or without medicine, without like plant medicine, like with or without ayahuasca, or with just drums, or with just sitting in nature, can enter into another zone of consciousness that they themselves may not be able to do, is just accepted from birth. It's like you're raised, this guy in the village can do mystical things that you yourself could do too if you're trained. It's not like he's born magical and he's elite. It's no, if you're trained in it, you can. And if you feel called to that, and that's where like that term of like called in life, because for them, it's like if you have a calling in life, it is a little bit of like life purpose, but it's also like there's a level of it that's like your calling in life is what's kind of exciting you, like whatever's pulling you in that direction that you want to get into. They call it a calling, but it's not like that's your life's purpose. It's your calling. So if you're called to work with the medicine, that may not be your life's purpose to be an ayahuasquero. If you're called to work with shamanism, you may not be your life purpose to be a shaman, but it's to understand that, to be with that, you know. And so like in their realms, like they do have some separation in the Quechuan tradition. Like they have the lower realm, the middle realm, and the upper realm. And they believe that the middle realm is where we are here. Like we are in the middle realm. The lower realm is like your internal self, your internal, like you go inward to yourself, which to them, like there's massive spirituality in there. Like there is levels of like in-depthness. Like, you know, they have a deity that we all have one within us. It's called Waskar, and he's the guardian of the lower realm. And when you go into the lower realm, you go into these deeper aspects of yourself and like other things, but it's not even just about yourself, because you can receive these amazing downloads. It's like very similar to transcendental meditation. And it's like you're going inward. And then there's the upper realm, which is where they don't use air quotes, but they use satire or sarcasm in their voice. And they're like, that's where the future is, or your ancestors are. That's where your guides are. And that's always been very interesting. That's where the future is. And that's where your ancestors are, is in the upper realm. Like it's outside of time. They wouldn't say it's outside of time, but they've just adopted that. They're like, it's not a time thing. The time is here in the middle realm. And so like they'll journey to the upper realm, they'll journey to the lower realm. And so like when they're out of their body, they could be in any of those three realms, because you can be out of your body in the middle realm. And generally you don't do middle realm work unless it's like remote body viewing. You know, somebody got lost in the mountains, we got to go find them. Like, you know, that's what would be used for that. Or if it's like trying to sense if somebody's okay. And like, this is something I have done. Like when we had one of my wife's cousins, she was staying with us for a while, and she's mid-20s or whatever. It was really, really snowy one night, and she was kind of like, hey, like I get off at this time, you know, I get off at 10, I'll be at your house by 11, you know. And I'm like, okay, cool. And like we're watching her dog too, and it's not a big deal. And it's like, okay, midnight rolls around, whatever. 1 o'clock rolls around, whatever. You're in your mid-20s. Well, it's really snowy out there. Okay, well, let's go ahead and go to bed. I wake up at 4 and she's still not here. Now I'm worried. And it's like, is this what it's like to have kids? I don't know. But like, so the only thing I could do is she's not answering her phone, she's not answering anything. And so I get a mid journey, you know, and for me, it's drum journey. Like I can go into astral realms without it, but it's faster for me to drum journey. Like I can get into that state faster. So I went in my office, got my drum out, and no, I could not see her directly, but I could see her car parked at a driveway covered in snow, and got a warm, sensational feeling that she was okay. Found out the next day, she went home with a coworker. It started snowing really heavily. She chose to stay over and did. Perfectly fine. All good. But it's like, there's that level of like, well, one, like could have told us, you know, just so I wasn't worrying about you. Yeah. But that's again, that's like your young 20s, like your mid 20s, like you're just out of the house. Like why would you thinking about it? I'm not your dad, you know, but it's like that level. And I'm always using that as an example. It's like, that's a real life word. Like I was worried and wasn't able to find an answer. And guess what? It turned out to be real. It turned out to be very real. She was at that house and was, you know, and so like, it's that level of two, like the belief too, in something is real. Me believing that I can travel in the mid realm and do a remote body viewing through drum journeying allows it to happen. And this is like other pin I like wanted to put a pin in, or like when you call out spirituality, it ceases, you know. And like I've been there before, both like when you see something spiritual and you call it out or not, you know. And this is like a little bit of like what I was talking about with like the gremlins, or like the lost and found gremlins. I was making a joke about that, but like I don't know what it is about the universe or the world, or like maybe there really are these invisible gremlins or extra beings, but sometimes like I'll lose something and I cannot find it. And I know I've checked that place 1,000 times. And then the next day or an hour later, the item will be in that exact spot. And this happened like in a spiritual realm. Like we were out at a retreat. Well, it was just like a spiritual retreat. We were just getting together doing meditations and breath works and some deeper workshops, but it was during the winter, and it was like it wasn't a masculine retreat, like where we're tapping into more the masculine men's energy, but it had that vibe. Like we're out camping in nature, we're in the winter,
Very
like
kind of
it may
rustic.
snow, it may not snow, you know. And so we were getting the fire ready, and like none of us could find our lighters, none of us could find the matches. And we're like, where are the matches? And like, how, you know, like out of the people here, it's like, how do 6 of us not have lighters or matches? Like, how is everybody? So we're searching the entire campsite. The sun's going down. It's getting less and less. And finally, someone's like, hey, I found a match. Like a single match.
A single match, yeah.
A single match in, like, you know, it's wintertime. So it's like, it hasn't snowed recently. Like, it didn't snow the day before, but like the ground is still wet. Like, you know, things are still kind of wet. And like the wood we found was like the driest wood we could find. And the wood we brought ourselves to the driest. And he finds a single match in the grass. And we pick it up and it's dry as can be. And then 2 seconds later, someone's like, hey, I found a matchbox. Finds a box of matches in the grass, dry as can be.
Yeah. So the second that one becomes possible, then it suddenly unlocks all the others. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then when we walk over to the fire, we have the camping chairs, and in people's cup holders, and 2 of them, there's a lighter. It's like, no, I know we checked the cup holders. Like, first off, no one takes a lighter out and puts it in a cup holder.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not really, you know.
It's not the place to go. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, how did that happen? And so like, that's what I call lost and found gremlins. It's like, okay, they get it. You're stressing, you're struggling. It's getting cold. If you don't figure this out, you're going to have to cancel this whole retreat. We're all gonna have to load up in cars, go home. Because I'm not putting anyone through the night in the woods without a fire. Like in the mountains, in the woods, in the winter. No.
Just not happening. Yeah.
And so we do it. Now here's the funny thing. Day 4 rolls around and we're going to be leaving the next morning. And we're running low on firewood. And we've got the fire down. It's, you know, it's that time where it's like, we could all go to bed and we'll be fine. Everyone get in their sleeping bags and we'll be good. We're all talking on the fire. We're just having this really deep conversation. We're watching the fire get lower and lower. And we know we're out of wood. And we're like, it'll be okay, it'll be okay. And it hits this point when it's just coals. It's just red coals. And it's keeping us pretty warm, and it's staying up red. We talk for like another, I don't know, hour and a half, whatever. And then finally someone goes, you notice that like, we're all still pretty warm, even though there's just coals. And we're like, yeah, that's really interesting. That's really cool. Thank you, universe. Thank you, Great Spirit. Like, that's cool. That's awesome. We're still warm. And then, of course, me and someone else just have to be the scientists, walk over to the fire and go, how is this still going? How is it possible? And we put our hand out to touch the coals. And I'm like, I feel heat. And he goes, I don't feel heat. I'm like, what do you mean you don't feel heat? And then I don't feel heat. And the coals go out. The moment we tried to explain why this fire lasted way longer than it should have, the moment we stepped out of, thank you, Great Spirit, for this blessing. Okay, let's figure it out now. The moment we stepped out of like, no, it has to be material, then spiritual, not spiritual, then material, it ceases. And so I think that's it. It's like, once you call it out, it's like, oh, you think you're better than me. You're not accepting the fact that we are all one.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing. Like, yeah, I mean, you see it in magic. It's one of the things I teach people when we're talking about magic, where it's like, if like we call it the lust of attachment, right? Where you're actively trying to create something or actually trying to manifest something as a result or a ritual, whatever it is. The more attached to the outcome you are, or the more attached to the way the outcome will present itself, the less likely it's going to happen, because what you're effectively doing is you're adding in this energetic drag of saying, okay, I'm only going to accept manifestation if it comes in this way. Where it's like, and you see and it's something that goes completely out the window when you start practicing astrological magic, right? You start like trying to create planetary talismans, whatever it is, because you learn very, very quickly that it's like, you can't control how the thing manifests. You can just put the idea out there, and then it will manifest how it wants to manifest, right? Like the result will come as it wants to come. It's like, if you want like money, whatever it is, like we're using Jupiter as an example, right? Or abundance. It's like, if you do a ritual Jupiter for abundance and you're expecting like, I don't know, $1,000 for rent or whatever it is, you might get that. You like, there are a million different ways that could come to you. But like, if you're so clear, like, okay, I'm going to do this, and then my boss is going to give me a raise, and that's how the money's going to come to me. It's like, you're setting so many constraints on how it's going to happen that it just creates this energetic drag that then just it stops it or slows it down from manifesting properly. You know, it's like, and it's such a hard thing to do. Like, I understand how hard it is. But it's like, because a lot of the times when we do rituals for whatever reason, it's because we want something, right? Like it's because we're attached to something, or like we want something to happen. Like it's really hard for us to sit there and be like, okay, I'm going to do something, and then I'm going to release attachment. I'm going to release it. Like, okay, I'm not. It doesn't matter how it manifests to me. Like I will accept it however it comes. Doing that is so difficult because again, like even when it starts to happen, and we start looking for things, or when things start to go our way, we start looking for explanations of how it's working, where it's like the more you do that, the more it takes you out of that mystical mindset. It's like the more, when that starts happening, the more you try and rationalize things. Like there are opportunities, or there are places where rationalism and mysticism do like coalesce, and they do come in line. Like even again, we cite Plato. Plato's entire thing is reason, right? His entire system is designed as a way of elevating and connecting with God through reason. So like there is this belief like spirituality and rationalism, or spirituality and reason, are not like the same thing, or they can't coexist. It's really not true, because there are numerous spiritual systems that rely on reason. Even Thomas Aquinas in the Catholic Church, right, the theologian, his entire system put out in the Summa Theologia is designed as a path of spiritual ascent back to God via contemplation and via mystical reason, right? So it's an interesting little weird thing, but it's like as an example, I could actually give you one from this morning, actually, a perfect example of this. I have been trying recently, at least, to get back on sort of the ritual bandwagon, where I went through like a phase where, despite what a lot of people will believe about me, I fully acknowledge it. I have not, at least recently, been doing daily ritual practice. Like people, when they come and talk to me, they think that because I'm teaching occultism, or I'm like teaching these things, they think that I'm actively doing occult stuff every day. Like they think I'm like some kind of weird Dumbledore in my office, like constantly doing stuff. It's like, no, like I'm a dude. I do regular normal human things. I'm fine, and I went through a phase where, because I was like actively teaching stuff so much, or doing so much like general work, I kind of got sloppy with my ritual practice. Like I wasn't actively, I was still meditating and doing all the kind of like normal, or what I would consider normal spiritual practices, but I wasn't going deep and doing like full on ritual stuff.
Yeah.
And then, especially over the past week with some of the conversations I've been having, I was like, I'm really feeling that it's time for me to get back into doing like actual ritual. It's like there's stuff I need, there's stuff I need done. There's people I need to like connect with. These kind of things that are going on. It's like I'm kind of in that space where I need to start doing rituals again. And I remember it happened last night. It got to the point where I was like, all right, I really need to do it, but I want some kind of accountability. I want some kind of help. So I did the very simple thing, which is one of the most powerful rituals you can do, which is just prayer, ultimately, right? It's like one of the most hilarious things that I found, where it's like I went really deep. Like again, even for me, I went really deep into occultism. I've done everything from goetic work to theurgic, all that kind of thing. I've pathworked the entire Key of Solomon, done it and succeeded with it, right? I've gone very deep into this stuff, and like all of that in like considered, I still think prayer is more powerful. Like I still think prayer is one of the most powerful forms of ritual we can do, because it connects us to something that's so much deeper than all of that, right? So I went there last night. Yeah, well, it's deeper to me, right? And that's the thing, where it connects me to me, I guess. It's an interesting way of thinking about it.
Well, and I guess that's a little bit my question just before diving into that is like, what is prayer to you? Like, what does prayer mean?
Right. So
Both of those.
It's in the best, this thing, the way I would explain it would be, prayer is ultimately you speaking to God, right? Whereas meditation is you listening to God. That's kind of the way I conceptualize it. And you can substitute God for whatever you want to use in your paradigm for that, but it's you actively having a direct line to that oneness, and you actively speaking, and then actually being able to say, okay, here's something I need support with. It's your way of actually speaking to that wider universal force, right? And then equally, meditation is the way that you receive the input from that, where you quiet yourself and you receive whatever answer that you're going to get from.
And just to help out those may have had that question, like what's the difference between prayer and meditation? Like you helped answer that, as well as also plenty of, like, by that definition, plenty of people are quote unquote praying when they do meditate. Because they're going in like, I have this question, I have this desire, I'm trying to figure out, I got to quiet my mind to get there.
Right.
Which like quick side note, one thing I learned from a friend that went and studied with Buddhist monks for a while is that
Mm.
Buddhist monks kind of chuckle at the Western world's way of meditation, because it's the idea of like, we got to quiet our mind, we've got to get still. And they go, yeah, that's step one. Because once you get still, then every time you get unstill or you get uncomfortable or something pulls you out of that, you're asking why. And what is that about me that just pulled me out of that stillness? Because the only reason you got pulled out of that stillness is because you yourself reacted to a thought, to a feeling, you know, my butt hurts, I'm bored, I'm hungry now. Is this even working? All of that is your personal thought reacting. So it's like, once you get still, it's like, well, why did that pull me out? What is that about me that like, and it could simply be, yeah, I need a cushion when I meditate. Like that's okay. Like they're also saying like, it's not like you're doing anything wrong. There is no wrongness when you get pulled out of it. But that's why they kind of chuckle. They're like, yeah, everyone's aiming to get still, but then they're like, they don't know what to do once they're still. And they're like, oh, I'm failing because I thought about something. Like, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
You do it perfect.
It's also that distinction, I think, between like active and passive meditation, whereas like there are different ways to meditate. And it's like one of the things that I always tell people when they first get into it. It's like people have this perception that meditation is one thing. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to cross my legs on my yoga mat, and I'm going to be quiet. And it's like, okay, I can think of almost every single mystical system in the planet right now would disagree with you. Like there are numerous ways of moving meditation where you are actively, I think Sufism, like they've, again, if you think of like the Islamic Sufi mystics, they have the twirling thing where they go around. That what they do with it is they get a question in their mind, or they contemplate a thought, and then they lose their sense of body by swirling while focusing on the thought. Right. And it takes them like out there, it takes the awareness away from the body and lets them contemplate the thought. And then all these insights flow when they're contemplating it. Like that's a moving meditation. Right. So there is this dynamic side to meditation where it's like, I don't know, it's very difficult. Again, it's very difficult for us as humans, even biologically, to just stay still. Right. It's almost like it's near impossible for us to stay still because we're hardwired to move with stuff. So it's such an interesting thing. Like I like to move in things. Like I fidget all the time when I'm doing things, right? So like I have always struggled with that kind of just sitting still, quieting the mind. Like it just doesn't, like I can get there if I really put the effort in, but then like there's that weird kind of, I don't know, we kind of like weird paradox where it's like I'm putting the effort into meditation, where it's like meditation is it should be lack of effort. Like I should be having, there should be no effort, right? It's the release of attachment to effort, but actually it takes me effort to get there. But then it's like, once I get there, then I can release, you know, and then I can see everything else that comes through. And it's so much better.
Yeah. Because even those, and this is like what my friend was saying, is like, even when you see like, you know, the monks or even like, you know, people like Jay Shetty, and they're just sitting there with their eyes closed for like 20 minutes meditating. He's like, there are things coming up for them. Like they're not just like in complete silence and stillness.
Yeah,
like,
it's not like just pure blackness, whatever. Like,
right.
There's stuff going on there.
There's stuff going on. There's stuff coming up, and they're facing it, and they're looking at it, and they're consciously choosing to not disengage from it, to not open their eyes, to not run away from it. They're choosing to continue to lean into it and go, interesting, what are you? You know? And so like, I agree. Like, and there's one, the definition like between prayer and meditation, I know it comes up all the time in spirituality where people wonder like, well, what's the difference? And like, again, is this massive, like, again, I'm not putting down Christianity anyway. I'm not trying to be mean or rude about it, but there's a lot of wounding that has happened due to Christianity. And there's a lot of people, like when they hit the point when Christianity no longer is serving them and they step out of it, those wounds become these traumas. They become the, you know, like these triggers that then it's like, oh, I'm offended by that. Well, what are you going to do about it? Are you misfiring on it? Or, you know, it's like they hear the word God. Oh, how dare you talk about God? And it's like, okay, you're not hearing, you're misfiring and shutting down like what's about to be said next because this person said God. It's like, even for myself, like a couple of the YouTubers I follow, like they are pretty devout Christians, and like sometimes they'll use a Bible verse here and there and then. Now I could choose to click off that video immediately because, oh, how dare they use the Bible? It's like, I'm not mad at the Bible. I'm not mad at Christianity. I'm not offended by Christianity. You know, it just doesn't serve me. You know, and so it's like, then I can hear the knowledge that they're pulling from that scripture that's giving them practical use to their life that they're trying to share in this video for someone else to have practical use versus not shutting down. And so I just like, that's why I invite people. It's like, if something we talked about with triggers, but it's like, even with this, like in the spiritual realm or any of realm, like you hear the word occultism, you hear Christianity, you hear God, you hear prayer. These are all words that like what do they really mean to you? Like, actually look at what that word means to you before turning off away from it, before running away from that thing, you know?
Yeah. You know, and the challenge you have with it there is that I'm sympathetic to it. Like I'm sympathetic to people who are, you know, who are going through, like they may have had a very negative experience with Christianity, so they're reacting to it. But it's like, and this is a very hard place to get to, and I can completely acknowledge it, but it's like, if there's that much energy that you're carrying around a reaction to those words, like look at what's happening there, right? You are constructing a worldview from a place of trauma, right? You are constructing your reactions from a wound, and that isn't healthy. Ultimately, like no matter what way you look at it, when you are coming, or if you have that adverse reaction to anything, it's that there is a wound there. It's like, do you really, like when you sit with yourself and you really unpack it, you're like, do I have a problem with Christianity or do I have a problem with the church? Because they're two entirely different things.
Yes.
Right. And especially, and again, I don't want to like actively shit on like the Vatican or anything for this, but like American denomination Christians, but the vast majority of like American Christianity is like that kind of, what do you call it? Wait, it's very Puritan. The vast majority of it is it's founded in Puritan thing. It's like that kind of like deliverance ministry kind of Christianity, like the mega churches, the faith healing, all that kind of thing. It's like that's all very Puritan. Right? It's like, and Puritans are like, again, I'm not bashing the Puritans, it's fine, but it's like a lot of like what a lot of people disagree with in Christianity is like I really think they need to be more specific. Where it's like Christianity is not one thing. Right, there are so many different branches of Christianity, and what not all of them agree. Right, Gnosticism is a kind of Christianity, right? And it's like I always like to tell people this, where it's like a Gnostic Christian would still have more in common with another Christian than it would with a pagan, right? Or somebody who wasn't Christian, right? They're still Christian. They still believe Jesus is the savior. They still believe in, to a certain extent, the Gospels and that kind of thing. Although they had their own as well, right? But they're still Christian fundamentally. It's like when a lot of people have that reaction to Christianity, what they're actually reacting to is the commercialization of the church in the 21st century, right? It's that Puritan kind of undertone that they're reacting to. And I'm kind of with them on it a little bit, where it's like, for me, and this is like the irony thing, and this is like the weirdest thing that people are like, people are always really shocked when I say this, where the deeper I went into Plato and the deeper I went into like core Greek philosophy and even magic to a certain extent, the more I found that a lot of my belief systems actually line up very well with historical Catholicism. Like the way God, especially God as it's described by Thomas Aquinas, like the medieval conception of God in the Catholic Church, like proper, like hardcore, like historical traditional Catholicism, he's basically borrowing almost entirely from Plato's version of the good, right? So it's the one, and it's this idea of God being this universal loveness, or this universal love and this universal oneness that we're creating. It's like he even said, like Aquinas, when he's doing his thing, he takes after Aristotle, who says that God is an unmoved mover, right? It's a creative force, it's the prime mover of the cosmos, but it's an unmoving thing. It's inherently perfect, it's inherently one. And that's what a lot of the early Catholic Church is based around. Like you can't take Thomas Aquinas out of the Catholic Church. Like the entire ritual format, the mass format, the entire foundations of Catholicism are basically based on his Summa Theologia, right? Now, the problem you have is in sort of the mid 60s or mid to late 60s, you had the Second Vatican Council, which is the Vatican II. And what's really funny with it is the vast majority of Vatican II were mostly Lutheran, right? They were mostly a Protestant denomination. So they brought a bunch of Protestant influenced stuff into Catholicism. And then they did everything like change the mass, they changed all the structure, all this kind of thing. And they actually made Catholicism, or modern Catholicism, more Puritan in its outlook. And it's like, it's weird, but like even though the Puritans aren't distinctly American, they do have a very interestingly like American flavor to them, where it's like, again, I don't want to be like stereotypical or like archetypes or anything, but it's like the American archetype is very kind of grand, in your face, kind of like, you know, like proper punches, like it's, but like it's like kind of evangelical Christianity that is a very American phenomena in a weird kind of way. And it's like, I can understand being averse to that, but it's like, that isn't Christianity, really. Like when I said, think about like, if you look at like historical Christianity, it's like, if you look at the teachings of Jesus versus how those teachings are then interpreted by the modern church, they are really two different things. Like, I've often made the argument, and this is sometimes pissed a lot of people off, where it's like the kind of like evangelical, like hardcore Bible Belt Christians you see in like in America right now are the same kind of people that Jesus was actively running away from back in the day, right? Like it's that kind of like fixed mindset there. Like he was actually trying to change it. Like when you think of like the core message of what Jesus was saying, like you don't need a church or a temple to worship God. Like you can come back to your own inner heart, you can come back to your own self, and you can connect to the Father through yourself and through him ultimately. And like that's the message he was teaching, where it's like that has been completely lost in like a lot of the modern like churches. And it's so interesting to me. But it's like I always like to clarify people when people come to me and they're like, "Oh, I don't like Christianity. There's been all this thing from there's so much suppression." Like I hear it in magic all the time. It's like even with magic, like I'm not going to deny it. Like there were tons of book burnings and destructions and the witch trials. Although the witch trials were all Puritan, right? But like, oh, book burnings and magic stuff, it's decimated. It's like, okay, when you actually look into the history, a lot of the Catholic communities were pretty ambivalent towards witchcraft. Like all the witch trials and like the hardcore stuff, that was all much, much later. And it was all Puritan and it was all like very hardcore, like mass hysteria.
Yeah,
that was
it's more mass
well,
hysteria or defaming each other than it was actual.
right, exactly. But the thing is, all of that is rooted more in politics than it is in religion.
Yeah.
Right. It was all, for the most part, it was like the church trying to legitimize itself as an authority in the medieval world or like in the early modern period. It's like when you actually look at how like if you look at like the traditional Catholicism, like the historical like patristic version when they were still figuring all this stuff out, like they were pretty ambivalent to like most magic. It's like it's interesting, like, and this is like one of the things I remember talking. I had Justin Sledge, so Esoterica, on one of my podcasts a little while ago, a few months ago. And we ended up talking about this, where it's like, if you go into any, it's so funny to me because like, especially with occultists, because some occultists do have some religious trauma, right? And they try and get away from it. And they get into, they think, you know, the Goetia and any of these like magical grimoires about summoning demons and all this kind of things. Like all of those were composed in Catholic contexts, right? They're all composed in church contexts. And what people seldom realize is that the vast majority of medieval grimoires were composed and used by the clergy, right? Like it was the church priests and the members of the clergy who were writing and using this stuff because it's a literate tradition. They're the only ones that can read and write, right? Like it has to be them. Like the general peasants weren't doing this stuff. It was the church members who were doing it. Like the intersection between magic and religion and all that kind of thing is a massive area of interest for me anyway. But it's fascinating when you look at the actual methodology of magic, like summoning demons, all that kind of thing. There is not a single reference to the devil in like any like medieval grimoire. Like at least in the context, like there's this common belief that like, you know, summoning demons and working magic is about selling your soul to the devil, all this kind of thing. It's like, where? Like that doesn't, like that concept doesn't exist in any kind of pre-romantic era grimoires, and even the romantic era grimoires that have that kind of like Faustian bargain idea where it's like, oh, I'm selling my soul. All of those were written after like the folklore of like Dr. Faustus like got into like the current consensus of things, so it was influencing it, right? Like it doesn't exist. That idea, like the idea of selling your soul is completely foreign to magic. It just doesn't exist in magic, right? And even then, if we're using like Solomon as an example, who is the guy who obviously like a lot of these traditions are ascribed to, he uses God. He uses magic in the name of God to bind these demons and help him build the temple, right? Like, that's the folklore. Like he's doing magic in service of God. It's like, it's never in service of the devil. It's like, it's magic in the service of self-elevation. Like even then, if you look into things like theurgy and all these different kinds of magic, it's about elevating the soul. It's about activating the soul, even like through divine names and these kind of things. It's about returning your consciousness to the one ultimately, and then there are different ways of you doing that through affecting change. It's like when you look at the actual methodology, you're looking at like speaking certain secret names or different kinds of things, or intoning certain sounds, all of which are divine names, like the names of God, right? The tetragrammaton or anything like that. And it's like all of that's done in service of God. And it's like, because like the only reason for it is that the vast majority of the people who wrote these things were Christian. Right? They were Catholic, and then they were more than that. They were Catholic priests. Like we have like 3 or 4 grimoires that were written by popes, right? Like it's not just the priest, like the Pope himself wrote a grimoire, right? And it's like, it's insane to me that like you have like these two like denominations of people where it's like, on the one side you have all these Christians who are in the very kind of Puritan mindsets who are going, oh, occultism is all about the devil, you're dealing with demons, all this kind of thing, you can't do that. And then on the other side, you have occultists with like religious trauma who are saying, oh my God, Christianity's burning my books, they're going to come and oppress me. And it's like, you guys really just need to meet each other.
Yeah.
Like if you guys met each other and sat down, you realize that actually your entire methods are exactly the same. It's like, and we can literally prove this, right? Because if you go back to the Middle Ages, like especially some of the early grimoires, like the early medieval grimoires, the like invocations and the like, I don't want to call them prayers because they're not quite prayers, but like the spoken formula that's used to call forth a demon or spirit or whatever kind, right? It's essentially word for word an exorcism, just said in reverse, right? It's like if you look at Dominican exorcisms, like the structure of an exorcism on how like somebody is casting out a spirit, you're basically just saying that in reverse. It's like you're taking that exact Christian Catholic formula and just flipping it on its head, and then bang, you've got a summoning spell for a spirit, right? It's like, like when you look at it in context, like of course that makes sense because the same people who were exercising were also summoning the things, right? It's like, but there was no bad distinction between it. It's like they're doing it, they're doing this magic in service of God ultimately, like, and like they're doing it in service of the self as well. And it's like it's such a funny thing to me where like, there's so much like religious trauma between both of them. It's like you guys really just need to meet and talk it out. Like, and you will realize you are literally the same person. Like, there's not a distinction between Christians and occultists. They're literally like most Christians are occultists in a weird way of thinking about it.
That's interesting because it's well, I mean, it's not doesn't have just with Christianity, but it's like so many groups we demonize or like, and even that word, like the word demonize,
right,
literally comes from the fact like I didn't mean to use that word, but I was going to have a topic anyways. Yeah, but like that spirits were called demons. And then eventually we started calling them demons. And then that actually literally demonized spirits. It made spirits into these evil entities. And so even like we demonize each other by making like, oh, this over here, this over here. Because like, like I fully agree. It's like Christianity is this beautiful thing. Like if you really look at like, you know, even the teachings of Christ or like the core principles of Christianity, they can help you live a very fulfilling life and a very loving life. When you add in the organized religion part and you add in these extra things, when then sin becomes a thing and you're not worthy in some way, and because you choose this, you're not good enough for dot, that's all organized religion. That's not the actual like core Christianity beliefs, you know. And even my personal belief on Jesus is like, I do believe that he was an ascended master. And I also believe that all the stories we have about weren't just him. I think it was him and a group of ascended masters going around doing miracles and getting written up. But that's a side note too of like, the Bible was compiled and written 400 years after this Jesus character we believe in, you know, lived. And I won't go down that route of like, because I still think, you know, a lot of the teachings of Jesus are great and ascended masters are great. And only other thing I'll say there is like that term Christ is a state of being. It's a state of oneness, like coming from the heart in a Christ-like way, coming from the heart in a loving, caring, I generally want to help you out, I generally want you to live a successful, joyful life, is like the Christness. And so Christhood was like given him. He was originally Jesus of Nazareth, later Jesus Christ. Well, actually his name is Yahshua. So it's like Josh, but that's a different thing.
Josh, the new Messiah, Josh.
Josh, well, because you know Yahshua is Joshua. But point being is like, his name is Jesus, and they became a Christ. But like by that same terminology, like the Buddha, Krishna, white buffalo woman are all also Christs because they found a way to come from that center. And like, you know, I could probably see in 50 years from now, people will refer to Rob Doss as an ascended master. And same with Don Miguel Ruiz, who wrote the Four Agreements. And I'm using them as an example because they hold that level. Like when I've never been in Ram's presence, but I've been in Don Miguel, you know, Don Miguel's. I can't believe I'm not saying his name right now. That's going to bug me later. But Don Miguel Ruiz, who wrote the Four Agreements, when I was in his presence, like there is a love. It's like the second you meet him, he cares about you. He loves you. Like I watched him, like every day we were there in a retreat together, he had a slice of pizza and a glass of wine and would watch the sunset. And every time you watched him do that, it was like he was doing it for the first time. And he would ask like, hey, I'm going to go over here on the porch. I'm going to have my slice and drink my wine. If you come over there, just sit there. I don't want to talk questions. I just want to enjoy the presence of life. And so you can sit there next to him and like just observe. And like it wasn't, he was like, I'm a guru, come sit around my feet. It was very like, for my personal container, I'm going to go enjoy life for a moment. You can be in my presence during that, but I don't want to talk humanly with you. I want to just observe, you know? And it's like, that wasn't a, you know, that taught me a thing there, but like just being in his presence, but like he sees a sunset and he's got a tear rolling down his eye. I was like, this is day 5, dude. And you're still crying over a sunset? Like, no, because each one was that uniquely beautiful to him. And so he stepped in that. So like, I just bring that up in that sense of like, there's so much more in common we have with each other if we drop these boundaries, we drop these labels, we actually get to know each other. You sit down and get in a room with people and it's like, it changes. Like, and this is even an issue we have a little bit here in America, like with capitalism. Like I don't think capitalism is evil, but the idea where we put people as numbers and not names becomes an issue, you know? And so it's like, when you really get to know somebody, when you really sit down with them, all the quote unquote evil things or the negative story you've created about them goes out the window, you know? Like, and I'll even go so far as to say, like, I never sat down with any of the world leaders, but I bet you if I did, if I sat down with them and had a glass of tea with them, I'd have a very different opinion of them, because I would now know them as a human, not as this leader figure, not as this corporation, you know? And so it's like, people in general, like we like to divide ourselves so much, and it's like, it's a human thing. We want to label things, we want to things. I think that's okay until we start trying to fight over that boundary, until we start trying to be like, you're an occultist, you're a Christian, you're into animalism, you guys don't talk to each other, or else there might be a fight. And it's like, no, please talk to each other, please sit down, because in general reality, like we all agree on a lot of the same things. And like, even that concept of like wanting other people to have joy and success in their life, I can't say that everyone agrees on that, but I have a suspicion, a sinking suspicion, that if I was to talk to the 8 billion people in the world and ask them if they wanted success and joy for others in the world and for themselves, I think they would say yes. Like, I don't have proof of that. I haven't talked to the 8 billion people yet, but it's like that level.
You might be very surprised very soon. You know?
I mean, that'd be quite a thing. Just go around to each individual person I meet on the street and just ask that one question.
That'd be like a good, I don't know, like a good documentary or something, like interview with 8 billion people.
8 billion people.
See like ask like 8 billion people the same question.
Yeah.
And like see if there's like any like universal thing. I have no, that probably would never be possible, but you know,
it wouldn't be possible. Like, and I say that just because like, even from like, not a logistics standpoint, like we'll drop logistics. From a heart standpoint, I know I would get stuck in a third world country and I would never leave. Not like financially, I would get stuck there wanting to help so much and wanting to like build stuff and like make a difference. And like, I could just see myself getting stuck in like one village and be like, I've got to help this village. You know, like, and so I'd probably only make it like a third of the way around. I'd make it to South America. Get stuck.
You think you're done. No, it's it's an interesting point. You know, what's my putting this? Something that I am using, or like the core philosophy that I'm using in even in my coaching practice, right? And I can't remember where I heard this quote, but it's such a beautiful and powerful quote that I've kind of, it's currently like defining my belief system, if you can say. But it's that beauty is vanishing from the world because we're living as though it didn't matter, you know? And it's such an important concept where it's like people, like when you go back into the ancient world, or you go back to any of these cultures, they were there's a level of it where yes, they're being in the present moment, yes, they're doing it, but it's like there was an active strive for beautification, right? There is an inherent value in beauty. It's like, it's not aesthetic beauty necessarily, not like things looking superficially good, but it's like things being beautiful in and of themselves, whatever that is. There was an active strive to create beauty or to help beauty express itself, whatever it is. And now when we look in sort of like the modern, a lot of Western society at least, we are really acting as though beauty doesn't matter, right? That it no longer has any inherent value, that it's just a consequence of something else rather than the goal that we're actively trying to create, you know. And we're seeing this on every single level. Like you look at buildings are getting uglier, right? It's not like nice to look at. Governments, I mean, especially I can critique my local council all day here because our road is filled with like potholes, right? And no one gives a shit. It's so annoying to me. Like driving my car, I'm just like the entire time. It's horrible, right? Where it's like it's little things like that where it's like people taking pride in the world inherently, like. And I think it's such an interesting concept to me where it's like, I think a large part of the reason, not to sound like humanistically selfish with this, but like, I think a large part of the reason is that humanity as a whole has forgotten its essential dignity, right? Like when you, like, again, if you go back to like Pico Mirandola, right, back to the Renaissance, this whole Renaissance humanist movement, the entire thing with the foundation of the liberal arts and the humanities, all this kind of thing, it was built, like the entire driving force for it was built on this idea that because human beings are naturally divine, we have a duty and a responsibility to ourselves to become the best version of ourselves, because that's how we then show up in the world. But at the very core of that is the belief that human beings are inherently good. And because we are inherently good, we therefore have a duty to do good and be good in the world. Right. And the whole purpose of learning the liberal arts, like having like again, even the fact that like math, English, all these kind of things are in your basic education, right, is that we have an essential duty to our species and to the earth and to our lives in general to educate ourselves. And by educating ourselves, we become better human beings and we elevate that good within ourselves and then elevate the beauty in the world around us. And that's a beautiful idea. Like I am 100% behind Renaissance humanism. Like in that sense, I am 100% a humanist, right? And it was about like finding perfection in the human form, ultimately. And when you fast forward to modern day, it's so interesting to me that like, what would you call it? Like that perception of the human being as being inherently good has been completely replaced with the opposite. That everyone is very, very quick to say human beings are shit. Right, it's like when you and you see it even in like all of like the like eco-friendly stuff. It's like, oh, the world would be so much better if humans weren't in it. We would stop cutting down trees. We would stop, like the animal kingdom would survive if we weren't in it. It's great. It's like, look at what you're saying yes to by acknowledging that, right? Like look, like you're like it's much easier. And this is literally like a hard-hitting truth for myself when I realized it. But it was like it's much easier to give away sort of our own agency and give away our own power than to take accountability for ourselves, right? It's much easier to just say the world would be better off without humans than actually saying, you know what, I'm going to take accountability and make myself better for the world, right? And it's like that's an issue, like that's a core issue. Like I think even like I would even go as far as to say that like the lack of human dignity that we now have on like a mass scale is really like the core issue that is arguably producing all these other issues, right? Like as you said, why we say capitalism, there one of the issues is like the devaluation of people into numbers. Right. That is it's a what do you call it? It's a symptom of this, right? It's a symptom of the lack of respect that humans have for themselves. You know, so I think there is an invitation there to explore that in ourselves. Like, why do we treat ourselves like that? Why do we have on a collective, like it's not necessarily even a personal thing, right? Because like some people have, I can profess right now, some people have a very over-grandized sense of self-importance, right? There are definitely some narcissists out there, right, who think they're amazing. It's like on like a core, like species-wide level, why are we so harsh on ourselves? Like, why is there such an undercurrent here of saying, oh, the world would be better off without humans? Right. Even in like this kind of like eco-friendly, like let's save the planet green vibe, like one of the like the core messages there is like, oh, human beings are the ones doing all this shit. So if human beings weren't here, the world would be better off. It's like, is that really true? Like it's almost easier there to give away, like well, I said it perfectly earlier, right? But it's easier to just say, let's get rid of all humans than for us as humans to take accountability and say, we're not doing that great right now. We can be better. We need to hold ourselves to be better.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, that's an issue for me. It's like there's a core thing there, but it's like we should actively be striving to constantly improve ourselves.
Yeah.
Like if we're not, there's an issue. And I think the core issue is that we've lost touch with that essential beauty and that essential dignity that we have, but also at the same time, as a consequence, we've lost touch with the sense of beauty that exists in the world.
Agreed.
Right. So we're no longer striving to perfect it because we think it doesn't matter. And because we think it doesn't matter, it's disappearing.
Exactly. I 100% agree. And like, I don't know when in society, like in humanism, like we that started, like when we begin to split. Like,
Yeah.
I have a speculation that it begun in the time when we started viewing, like we touched on it earlier in this podcast, like the God and nature being separate. Like that belief system, I think, is where it comes from originally. And it just expanded out upon that, because it's like, if God and nature are separate, that means God are humans and nature is separate from that. So like one of them has to survive versus are the same. And now, like, I know, like, I'm not going to get this exactly right, but I know in like the Constitution for the United States of America, it is written like we believe in two laws, God's law and natural law. And that right there, I think, is a core subconscious geometry that has messed up America in a lot of ways, because we have spent the last 250, 300 years marching away from natural law. Like, because we believe it's separate from God. We believe humans are separate from nature. And so like, even with the green movement, if it was like, yeah, humans are doing this, we need to do better. We as humans are nature. We are animals. Like, yes, we may be the most sophisticated animals that are on this planet. And I do that for a reason, because like, what is sophistication?
Yeah.
Like the fact that we poison the planet and we poison ourselves doesn't sound very sophisticated. Like, I think
there's a funny
wolves, the
quote about
bears,
this.
and the hawks might be more sophisticated than us, because they're not.
Yeah, well, there's a funny quote about this. I can't remember again. I can't remember who says it, but it's like, for thousands of years, humans have believed that we are the most superior species on the planet because we developed writing and cities and language, and we are able to wage wars and we can dominate each other. And for that same thousands of years, dolphins have thought that they are the most superior species because they exactly don't do any of those things.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same
it's
thing.
beautifully said. Like, yes, 100% agree. And it's like, yeah, we are super smart and super adaptable. I mean, like, if anything, over the last 3 years, the entire world has shown us how adaptable we are as humans, how much things can change. You know, like we were talking about a little bit of this before we jumped on here, do this, was like technology, like just the way like it's evolved and the way we rely on it and the way so many things are moving digital. And it's like, I have a mixed feeling about that. Like, I think it's such a beautiful tool, and like, it is a beautiful tool because like you are in the UK. Like, I'm like we would not be talking. We would not be friends had technology not existed. But at the same time, I also believe like there's power in like live retreats, going through live experiences together, experiencing things live. So it's like, there needs to be that balance of both, and I think, it's similar. It's like technology, and I know I'm kind of going off of this spiritual route here, but it's like technology and like all that, like it's human evolution. Like even AI, as scary as some people are of that, like it's not a scary thing. It's just another tool. It's not as smart as you think it is. And even when it does, it's still another tool. Like, it's up to you how we use it and so forth. But that's like with anything and any belief system, And so it's interesting. It's like this separation between us and nature, this separation between us and spirituality. And like you've talked about, like that strive to be the best version of yourself, like as a humanity, to like improve yourself. So like that is a version of how you get your worth and how you validate. But like, if you're bettering yourself because you think others will view you better by doing so, you're not really living, and like, this is a Jay Shetty quote out there, but
it's like you're living for others rather
you're living
than
for others. Like, you're not who you think you are. You're not who they think you are. You are who you think they think you are. Like, and so it's like, that's the paradigm that a lot of us get stuck in. And so it's like, when you step out of that, improving yourself because you want to be better, because you want to have a better life, it's like looking at your neighbor and being like, oh man, they've got 4 cars and they've got this really nice yard and all that. It's like, that's not going to get you 4 cars and a nice yard. Not saying I want 4 cars. I can only drive one at a time, But like the point being, you know, and no diss on anyone that has a bunch of cars as a collector, like that's what makes you happy, great. But it's that idea of like, well, why would I want 4 cars? Oh, okay, because I'm a collector of cars and I would enjoy that. Why would I want to have the most luscious green yard in the world? Oh, because I want it to look that nice. Not because I want my neighbors to see how nice my yard is. I want it to look that nice. I want to give back to the earth. I want it to be healthy. But as well as like, I'm also honoring the fact like I live in Utah where it's deserty, and wasting water to make my lawn super lush and green doesn't sound like I really care about the earth. It sounds like I care about this little patch of land that would be brown if I wasn't here anyways. And see, that's the trick. If I wasn't here anyways, it would be brown. So where am I going to put my energy? Like I'm saying, like not as like if me as a human wasn't here, but if me as a person didn't own this property, if there was not a house on this property, the grass would be that way anyways. So it's like, what level am I honoring nature? And what level am I like taking away from it? Like, what level am I running away from it? You know, like the last example I'll share on this, and like I don't know if you know who has recycling in their area and who doesn't have recycling in their area, but like we do. So like the idea of like me washing out like the orange juice bottle or the cashew milk carton, you know, washing that out to throw it in the recycle is an extra step and extra time I have to do. But I'm doing that because I do care about the earth. And I'm not doing that to be like, oh, look at me, I'm recycling. I'm so cool, everybody. I'm the best hipster. I'm not a hipster, but but like, yeah.
The beard would disagree.
The beard would disagree. Like, just I have a whole thing with like making sure, I don't know. I don't care how people look at me, but every now and then I'm like, I probably look super like a hipster.
Yeah.
Or I've seen myself get the homeless eye view when I'm like just like in my normal coat, like walking like to my car from the store, and people are looking like, I have a car, I have a house, I'm not homeless. Like it's just
it's one of the things. A real quick funny story with this. Like this was like months ago now. For people who don't know me, my background before getting into like coaching was, I think, was in archaeology. That's what my original degree is in. And about 5-6 months ago now, a friend of mine called me up because a Taoist manuscript appeared at auction. And it is a Taoist ritual manuscript. It's a manuscript of Taoist alchemy, ultimately, or it's what we call like Fulu Pai registers, which are, there's this concept in Taoist magic, or at least this particular branch of Taoist magic, of certain talismans which are drawn a certain way that are associated with different organs or different spirits and that kind of thing. And you draw them and then you burn them, and then it releases this chi that's embodied in the geometry, ultimately. And I have kind of developed this weird relationship with my friends where because I'm the occultist, like every time something weird happens, my friends call me up and I'm like, Chris, something weird's happening. Now's the time for you to shine, right? And one of my friends called me up about 6 months ago because a friend of his was like selling off some like their belonging, or like he was like curating a private auction collection for this guy. And this guy was basically selling off a Taoist manuscript, right? It's alchemical manuscript. And he's like, this thing looks cool, Chris, can you come and authenticate it? Can you come and look at what this is? I'm like, yeah, sure. And I managed to do it. It was Taoist. I said all this kind of thing. Long story short, I got it. I actually managed to acquire it at auction. It's now in my back room. It's about, I think, about 200 years old. It's amazing. I love it so much. And my first instinct of like what I wanted to do, it was like, oh, I have some of my old Chinese archaeology professors at university. I'm going to go take it to them and see what more I can find out about this thing, if I can get it translated and I can work from it and I can actually build like a ritual practice from it. And it's like, it didn't occur to me at all, like how weird like that entire concept would be to somebody who isn't in spirituality. Like, and the more I thought about it, the more I like started to laugh to myself, where it was like, I was on the train to London. I was actively walking through London with like a little satchel bag on, and there was like a 200-year-old manuscript filled with like demonic sigils and like how to summon ghosts in my pocket, like just casually walking through London. And I walked in and like completely didn't even realize, like my hair was like all messy, like down, whatever. I was wearing a Beatles t-shirt for one. I walked in to see one of my archaeology professors, and the first thing he said to me, he was like, "Oh my god, you've become a hipster," right? Because like my beard was like really down, like my hair was cropped. I was wearing a Beatles t-shirt, and I was wearing this like really loose satchel. And I came in, sat down, pulled out this like 200-year-old manuscript. I was like, "So, tell me about ghosts." And he's like, you've become a hipster. I was like, oh my God, I totally have. I've become a hipster. Oh my God, what do I do?
What do
I
I
was
do?
walking around, I went out, I got like a Starbucks cup and everything. I was like, I've become the thing I hate.
And that's the thing. It's like that division. It's like that assumption. This is how
Yeah.
hipsters are. And it's like,
It's
oh
like how
man,
I look, how based on how I looked, I was like, yeah,
how I look, and
I'm
this is
fully a
it.
hipster. Yeah.
And I have to laugh because it's like there have been moments where I'm like, I'm not a hipster, and though like maybe I don't even know what the term hipster fully means. Is like when I'm realizing I'm saying this is like there's probably people out there that identify it that would specify otherwise, but like there was that moment where I was like just the other day, it's like I'm in yoga pants, like these sacred geometry yoga pants, and I'm wearing a Care Bears t-shirt, and I have my beard, and like yes, I'm just chilling around in my house. But it was like, oh, we gotta go to the store real fast. I'm like, yes, like I was kind of in like my yoga clothes, my pajama clothes, like, okay, I got in my yoga clothes, did my workout, and then I was like, oh, gotta go to the store real fast. And I'm there and I just have that feeling, and like it's snowy, so I put on my boots. So now I'm in like big
Like
commando
mix
boots.
and match. Yeah.
Yeah, like just this huge mixed match. And I got my, Carhartt jacket on, and I'm walking to the store and I'm like, I totally look like a hipster right now. Like I totally look like a guy that doesn't know how to drill a hole in the wall. And I'm sorry if that's not what a definition of a hipster is, because that's not, I'm not bashing hipsters.
I think that's probably a better definition somewhere, but I don't know what.
But like I have that feeling sometimes of like, and this is what I'm bashing. Like that's why I have to press this. Like I'm not putting hipsters down, but my preference of hipsters, and please correct me if I'm wrong out there in the things, it's like most of them don't know how to do blue collar work with their hands.
Yeah.
And not saying I know it all. Like I don't know electrician. Like I'm not a master foreman. I'm not a this or that. Like I don't know all the things, but I know some basic things. And so there was just that concept of like I don't know what it was in my mind, but it was like if somebody like car needed to be jumped out in the parking lot, they're not going to ask me. Like that was my thought. I know
they're not even going to acknowledge you. They're just going to like see you, and their eyes are just going to glaze over. Yeah.
Like they're going to be like, "Oh, dude, male dude. Oh wait, nope, he's definitely not dressed like someone that would have jumper cables. Yes, I have jumper cables. No, I can't jump you from my car because my car is a Prius hybrid, and they can't jump other vehicles."
Yeah, no,
I'm not painting this hipster picture very well.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, it reminds me of a South Park episode, where like Kyle's dad buys like a Prius. And he's like he's going around, and like his like catchphrase is like a really sarcastic thanks. He's like going around, he's like, I'm working for the environment. Thanks. It's like the entire running joke is that eventually it gets to the point where like they love the smell of their own farts. So it's like he's doing it, he's like, and like every time he farts, he just stops and smells his own farts because like, he just loves his own smell. And he's like, my biggest become Prius hipsters, and it's just so funny. It's just like,
oh man,
I love South Park. I love it so much.
Great. And Grant, like I acknowledge like South Park there, and myself, like I'm blowing it to the greatest proportion.
Yeah,
no way do I want to.
It's like an extreme example. Yeah,
extreme example. And I'm really not like because I really do care about people, and I really don't care a lot about what you identify yourself as long as you're also aware of like what comes with that title, and maybe this is a good closing point for at least today's episode, but like to dive into that just for a second of like, and not harshing on anyone and ripping down on you for choosing a title, but if there's like when you choose a title or you choose to identify as something, like you said, like what are you saying yes to, what are you saying no to when you identify as that? But part of what you're saying yes to is how people view you. Like I'll use that same hipster example for a moment. Like if I would have, and granted, that was my projection of thinking no one's going to ask me for help. Not that I wanted people to ask for help. Not that I was like, I have all the time in the world. I hope someone asks me to help fix their car. I don't know that much about cars anyways, but like, I can jump a car, I can fix your oil. Like I could tell you that what's wrong probably and tell you need to go see a mechanic, or, hey, you could probably go hire your cousin to do this. Like I can do that much, probably tell you what, but point being is it's like, if I would have had a tool belt on or had a mechanic's outfit on, they would like if I would have been wearing a mechanic jumpsuit that I didn't even, just because I wanted it because it was warm, it looked cool or whatever, or if I would have had my tool belt on for some reason because I was just, fixing something at the house, someone might ask me to really fix their car. Someone might ask me, hey, do you know the code or like how I can build a baby, an extra nursery for my home? Like I might be asked something I actually don't know about because of like what I'm wearing, but also like what I'm identifying as. I'm using the wearing as an example, but like the words we use. So like I'm not identifying myself as a mechanic, but if I walked around saying I'm a mechanic, you're going to expect certain things of me. So if I walk around saying I'm a coach, which I am, and I do claim that, you're going to expect from me that I can help you look deeper at your life and give you tools to shift your life. Maybe that's not your definition of a coach, of a life coach, you know, but like there's kind of this general, and I get all the time, people are like, oh yeah, my boyfriend or my brother, like they just need to get their life together. Maybe I should send them to you. And it's like that immediately assumption of like, you're a life coach, you can fix their life.
Yeah.
That's what I get for calling myself a coach. No,
Yeah.
I can't fix your life. You can fix your life.
Yeah.
I can give you the tools to fix your life. I can't heal you. I can give you the tools to heal you. You know, like I'm nothing. I'm just the finger pointing at the moon. Please don't get lost on the finger. Like, please focus on the divinity and the glory of the thing that you yourself have. But it's like, if I identify as a coach, that's what's going to happen. I identify as a medicine man, like I'm going to get asked questions about medicine. And it's happened before. I've got asked questions I don't know answers to.
Yeah.
I have the option, bullshit and be wrong, or maybe right, or just admit I don't know, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's like whatever title you identify as, like, you know, that's just something that's big to me. It's like, I don't care what you call yourself, what you identify yourself as for like any title, whether it's like how you show up, sexual orientation, or identify as a human, identify as a job, identify as anything. I don't care, but I just want that consciousness awareness of like, if you identify as something, be prepared for the questions or the expectations.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, then say don't know. And I'm not telling you how to live your life or how to be. It's just like, that's what's worked for me, is like being like, these are the titles I carry. And even like I identify as a man. And even as like maybe like I'm a married straight white man. I get questions about marriage sometimes. I'll be, how long you been married? Oh, 5.5 years. Oh, you probably know some stuff. Well, yes, I do, but I'm not an expert in marriage. I would not give you marriage counsel because you know,
So
but
because
like,
I'm not trained in it. Yeah.
not trained in that, but people expect that sometimes. So like, oh, you've been together long enough. Like you could probably help us. We've just been married for a year. I can tell you what worked in my first year of marriage, but I can't tell you what's going to work 100% in your first year, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, like that's just the thing that, you know, out there, like, even like, you know, as yourself, like identifying, you know, as conscious creators as we do, or as an occultist, like, and me identifying as like someone's walking the shamanic path. Like I won't call myself a shaman because I'm not there. If you call me that, I don't know if I'll correct you or not. I probably will correct you and tell you I'm much too young for that title.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, it's a fascinating discussion. It really is. And it's one of those things where if we allow, what's the way of putting it? If we allow our beliefs to dictate history, then we betray both, right? And the problem that we have with it is, or the challenge I have with people who, especially in spiritual, so I'll use like spiritual circles or like labels that spiritual people use as a like the example is what my field's in, or it's what I have the most experience in. I find a lot of people, there are a multitude of reasons that drive people to give themselves labels and attach themselves to certain traditions or certain things. And the issue I have with it, especially coming at it from like an archaeological or a historical background, right, is a lot of the time when people are like you said, a lot of time when people are giving themselves these labels, they don't actually know with full confidence what they're agreeing to, right? They're doing it because of, well, there are a number of reasons to it, but and this is where I get a bit abrasive with it, and people always get a bit triggered by me, so I'm going to fully own it. Before you give yourself any label, and before you start applying things to yourself, you need to go into your shadow. You need to ask yourself something very, very powerful, which is how much of your spirituality is being rooted in vanity here? How much is that label serving you, and where is the desire for you to label yourself coming from? Like, why are you not satisfied, or why is it not enough for you to identify as yourself, right? And what I mean by that is every single time people ask me what I am or how I identify, and I could give any number of reasons, and I get it asked a lot because I'm coaching, I'm teaching occultism, I'm doing all this kind of thing. Like people were like, oh, are you Wiccan? Are you pagan? Are you Gnostic? Are you whatever it is? Like, I'm Chris. That's it. Like, I have no other desire to be anything else. I have like there's no reason to be anything else. I am Chris. Chris is enough for me. I am embodied as that energy. Like my geometry, whatever this is, I'm identifying as Chris. and that's the only label I need, because I'm not attaching any external validation or importance to anything outside of myself. And the other challenge I have with it is it really comes down to identity, where I don't, and it's just a personal thing for me, because I don't like that idea of us giving our identity or putting our identity in specific boxes and saying, I am this because I practice these things, or I am this whatever for this reason, right? Again, I have the same thing that we said right at the beginning, is like, finish that sentence when you're doing that, right? I am this in this moment, right now. I am showing up as this. This is my identity currently, right? The problem you have is, in a lot of spiritual circles right now, a lot of modern sort of self-help circles, with this increased reliance, and I would argue there's actually an over-reliance on personal feeling or personal opinion. People, like, if you root your entire belief system and your entire identity in your belief, that's not a stable, healthy identity, right? Because that kind of world paradigm swings wildly from ecstasy to paranoia completely. At the given moment, it's like, the second you identify yourself based on a feeling, the feeling can change, right? I could wake up tomorrow morning and I could feel something else, and I could be something entirely different, right? And it's like, so is there an overarching self here? And then again, this is like a massively wider philosophical discussion we don't have time for, right? But like, I am very into Buddhism and stuff as well. A lot of the Eastern philosophies, it's like, one of the things you see in Buddhism, which has always caused controversy, is this idea of anatta, which is the no self doctrine. Right? The Buddha said that there was no unchanging self. There is no overarching self that exists. In fact, there is no soul in Buddhism, right? Because there is no unchanging self. The self is always the self and the identity is always in flux. Coming back to sort of this idea of labels, though, to sort of focus it a little bit. The challenge I have, what it really comes down to, is the history side of things, where it's like, people don't know what they're agreeing to. If you haven't studied the history and you don't know where traditions and concepts and things come from, you don't know what you're talking about ultimately. Like, it's like, you there is your personal experience and your personal gnosis, and there's a place for that. But there's absolutely that element of, like, what we can say is subjective truth or personal truth, like your personal experience of something. But a lot of the time, if you're wanting to buy into an already established tradition, you need to know that tradition, right, in order to get those experiences. Like, and I'll use the term witch as an example, right, which is a really, really common one. And it's a word that is used and abused so much because people confuse witchcraft with magic, and they use the terms interchangeably, and they are completely different things, right? Although many players say they're completely different, it's like, they are different things, right? Witchcraft is a specific type of magic that is practiced by a specific group. It is a word that describes a set of practices, right, or a amount of practices that is within a certain tradition, which is for the most part British, but also kind of European folk tradition. Ultimately, like, it's the magic, the magic that was used by the village cunning folk, right, of mostly Britain and Europe, or mostly Britain, right? And it's like, it's become a bit of a byword in a lot of kind of these modern spiritual circles, to a certain extent feminist circles as well, which I can understand. But the practices that traditionally make a witch are not at all being done by people who call themselves witches nowadays, right? And that's an issue to a certain extent. Like, I can understand why people want to associate with the word witch, but it's like, for me, if you're associating with that word, then you need to know what you're agreeing to. You need to know the practices, and you need to hold space for the fact that people are going to question you on those practices. And if you don't know them, or if you're not doing those certain practices, then you can't in good conscience call yourself a witch, right? There's a disconnect there, where like your actions and your desires are not lining up, where it's like, if you want to be a witch, like, go all into witchcraft, go and study it, go and read it, go and actual practice it, reconstruct those traditions, right? But do it within that context and within that paradigm, because if you're not, then it's not witchcraft, right? Then you may be practicing spirituality, you may be practicing magic, that's totally fine, but it's not witchcraft, right? It's like, there is a set established form and set of practices that these things do, you know. And the other issue, like witchcraft is like a good magical example. The other issue that you often find, and this is I don't know, risque, I guess, a little bit. So I'll try and use words that won't get a shadow ban. There is a big issue with the whole, I don't know what we can call it as in terms of the culture, like the indigo child starseed culture that exists, right? And I'm gonna say it, I'm gonna be very honest and flat out from the surface, like right from the start. The vast majority of starseed literature, or the vast majority of the starseed stuff, more or less comes from the Nazi Party, right? Or it's more or less being very much refracted through the lens of white supremacy, ultimately. And it goes back, like it dates back to like the core concept of where it's come from, date back to notions of Aryan supremacy. And when that enters the picture, you know, like when something that heavy enters the picture, with the big R word that I'm not going to say in case, you know, that's where I have another slight issue with it, where it's like, when, even though people, I'm not going to say like starseeds are like that or anything like that, but because there's a level of ignorance there, where it's like you haven't studied the tradition, you don't know the history, and you don't know that that system that you're participating in is actually inherently contributing to an unfortunately rather negative system that's perpetuating an old cycle, right? And you can do that with anything. Even well, like even real quick, like even like the indigo starseed crystal thing, it creates this interesting weird hierarchy that exists, where it's like, oh well, indigo children are better than regular humans, crystal children are better than indigos, and if you're a starseed, it's like, oh well, I'm a starseed in the like Galactic Federation, and it's like all the species are in different orders. It's like, I hate to say it, but when you actually like zoom out and look at what that entire thing is, it's basically spiritual R word, right? That's basically what it is.
It's spiritual hierarchy. It's spiritual supremacy, and that's something like and this brings up an interesting concept. So I didn't mean to cut you off. It's just kind of okay, like this role of like the starseed thing. Like the moment this is just my personal belief and like my viewpoint, but this is like where it becomes an issue with the spiritual hierarchy, is when you're like, oh, I'm a crystal kid, or I'm an indigo child, and that person that's not into spirituality is not. So thus I am better than them, or I am more spiritual than them. And like, that's where it gets tricky. Like that's where you're perpetuating that supremacy, that hierarchy that doesn't help people, that doesn't put people down. Like it's no different than being like, this type of person, because of the way they look and the way that they believe, are less than me. So they should build pyramids, or they should build railroads. They should be, you know, like making something, this word is okay to say, like making someone a slave because they're down from you, you know, is where, I'm not saying like we're going that same direction with this. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but there's a level of like, when you put yourself above somebody because you believe of like your label makes you better than somebody, or this thing that's like, that gets really hard. And that's where I've always had the, like, not an issue with starseeds, but in the starseed conversation, when someone is like, well, I'm from this section, and oh, you're from this other section over there. Well, we're actually more advanced than you. We're a 7th dimension race, and you're a 5-dimension race. And it's like, okay, thanks, dude. Like, how is that any different than saying, oh, you were born low class and I was born high class, so I automatically will be better than you in everything for the rest of my life. Like, that's where I sort of have an issue with it. And it's like, it's, you know, play with it, but it's like, and this is where I have an interesting thing where like I lean into like the new world, like the new world we're bringing about, of how we change words and how we change things. And I say it because like this system is routed in like a lot of this supremacy and a lot of like better than thou energy. But if enough of us use it, like if enough of us go, look, you might be a crystal kid and I'm an indigo kid, and that person is a rainbow child, but guess what? We're all starseeds. We're all multidimensional beings. It's like when that word comes out, or like we're all multidimensional beings, whether you're aware of it or not, or we're all starseeds, whether you're aware of your starseed or not, then it drops that better than thou thing. And I think we can actually change it. And I use that like as an example, like if we use it properly, and we do a little bit of the research and realize, oh, it comes from this better than thou standpoint, let's not use it that way, and that can change it. And I'm using literally the example I want to use here is like the word incredible. Incredible used to mean you have no credit, you are a liar, you're a deceitful person, and you do not belong in the village. You're incredible. That's not what it means today.
Yeah.
Incredible means awesome. Like we have a whole movie called The Incredibles about superheroes. Like,
yeah, it's like something beyond credit, like something that can't even be credited because it's so amazing. Yeah,
it's so amazing. And so it's like that used to mean you had none. So it's like, I think as a society, consciousness awareness allows us to change the narrative, allows us to change things. And so like a lot of this entire conversation with me and Krista has been things we become aware of and how we change our lives based on it. And like that's in general what I want to bring to the world is just be consciously aware. Because like when you're consciously aware, you make consciously choices. And then we all consciously evolve. Like when I'm aware, I make better decisions. Or I choose into a decision I know is not the greatest. You know, like I'm still
like
making
you do it with full consciousness.
Consciousness,
like that's the thing with it, where it's like, even like, again, we can use stars as an example, but it can be any of like the labels that people attach. It's like the second that giving yourself a label like that gives any or creates any level of difference from your neighbor or another person, it's coming from a place of separation, right? If there's any sense of you saying, okay, I'm an indigo child and you're not, right? The second that there is that level of division that exists, then that's where there's a perpetuation of this issue that's coming in, right? Where it's like, I have a problem, like I love it when everyone's like, yes, we are all multidimensional beings. I completely agree. I'm 100% with that, right? The second that somebody says, oh, well, I'm more in tune with my multidimensional self than you, I'm like, no, okay, hard pass on that, right? And it's like, it's an interesting, weird phenomenon, because like, you can even use like the 2012 example, when we've talked about this before, but there is also this like interesting, like, well, we in religious studies we call it like a physicalist eschatology to it, but like it's like when you look at the 2012 phenomena, and everyone was saying, okay, we're going to ascend from 3D to 5D, right? Or like, there's the 5D people, there's the 3D people, and all the people who are spiritual and are star seeds and all this are going to transcend, and they're going to go off in this other place where all the other star seeds are, right? That's really not that different from Christian deliverance ministry. When you think about it, it's like replace 5D ascension today with second coming, or like the rapture, and it's basically the same narrative, right? The believers, the awakened ones, the star seeds, are going to transcend this world, and everyone who isn't a spiritual person is going to get left behind. Ultimately, always going to get stuck and stay in 3D, right? What that does, and all that kind of narrative, and even in the same like vein of thinking, where you see it all over the place nowadays on like Instagram and social media, like DNA activation, right? Or like junk DNA activation, where it's like basically spiritual eugenics, right? Like your DNA is somehow different than somebody else's, and there is this sense of division, right? All that does is serve to disconnect you from your fellow human being, ultimately. And like I understand why it's all there, like why it's exploded, why it's so popular. It's like because like the identity politics and in spiritual, or like spiritual identity politics, they provide what all religions provide. They provide an explanatory framework for suffering and evil in the world. It's like, okay, I feel alone. I don't feel like my parents are my real parents. I'm upset at the state of the world, what's going on. I find it hard to function in certain situations. I have highly functioning anxiety, all these things. Well, it's okay. Of course, I know why that's happening to me, because I'm not from here, right? I'm not from here. I'm not inherently human. I'm different than other humans. That's why I'm experiencing these challenges that I'm facing. It's like the second that you buy into that narrative, you are saying you are different than another person, right? It's like, and this is like the entire irony of it when you think about it. It's like the other person's probably experiencing those same feelings, right? We are human. We all experienced feelings of alienation. We've all experienced feelings of anxiety and feeling lost and not knowing who we are, right? Not necessarily feeling like we're at home in a certain country or a certain environment. Like, they are human concerns. The second that you start externalizing that and saying that, oh, I'm feeling these things because I'm from another planet, or I'm here to create a new spiritual world because I'm upset with the state of this world. It's like, there's also like a slight savior complex there. I think a little bit like that's too deep to get into, but I think there's like a savior complex there where it's like, I have to take on all this stuff and create this new spiritual world. It's like, do you? Like I understand the meaning behind it. I understand the desire for it, but it's like, it's not something you need to shoulder the weight of. But the second you start engaging in that division and externalizing your sense of meaning or externalizing your sense of identity, then it's dividing you from from other humans, right? And I think it's doing you and all the future people that you will meet that will love you, that you haven't met yet, it's doing all of that a disservice if you're externalizing yourself, right? Rather than actually going within yourself and saying, okay, what is it that's driving me to give myself this label? What is it that's driving me to give myself this identity, right? Why do I feel not enough? And that's such a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
Right. It's a dark question. When you sit there and you think, say, hey, I want to give myself the label of indigo child. I want to say I'm a starseed, right? But the second that you sit there and you say, okay, what's not enough about Chris? What's not enough about me that's making me feel the need to identify as something other than I am, right? Or other than I currently am perceived, right? Like, what is it that's driving that lack of fulfillment there? Like, where is that need coming from? Is it a need to be seen? Is it a need to be heard as you are? You know, that, and you can ask the question, like, do you actually need another identity or another label to get that? Or do you just need to have a good conversation with a friend? You know, like, do you just need to have a conversation with somebody who truly sees you? You know, like, that's kind of my whole shtick with the whole thing, where it's like, I don't like, I know it probably sounds like I'm being super cynical. It's like, oh, like I'm being angry towards all these people who are identifying. It's like, I don't mind it. It's like it's basically like a new age version of 23andMe. You know, it's like it holds about as much weight for me as like doing a BuzzFeed quiz to tell me what like kind of pizza I am. You know, it's like, it's great to do. It's a bit of fun while you're having some drinks around a campfire, or you're like having some food or whatever. Like, it's a great time to find out what kind of indigo child thingy I am, whatever it is, right? But the second that I start forming my identity on that, like, that's where I have an issue, because like then I'm creating this sense of division ultimately.
Yeah. And I agree. Like, it's that, because like, by all means, like, in no ways do I want to feel like if you've had some spirit seed connection,
Right.
or indigo child deep thing, and it's made you feel better, made your life better, you know, I don't want to discount that, because like, for myself, like, I feel very loss of tribe. Like, I'm not close with my parents, I'm not really close with my family, so I do have a sense of loss of tribe, you know. And like, even ancestor work, it's like, yeah, a lot of my ancestors, like, yeah, there's a few in there that were, you know, Native American, or a few that were, you know, not, but a lot of my ancestors are like colonizers and people that didn't do great things and hurt people. And so like, there is this sense of like, where do I belong? I don't want to belong in the wrong side of history, you know, quote unquote, the wrong side of history.
Yeah.
And it's like, that doesn't mean everyone on that side was bad. It doesn't mean everything was there. But like, and I'm only using that as myself as an example. It's like, because when I first found out about star seeds and indigo children, and like, there was a sense of like, I'm more than who I thought I was. Not that I'm not who I think I am. I'm more than who I think I am. And that really gave me comfort. And then as I dove into it, it was like, and see, I was blessed. Like, I never quite got to the point where I myself felt like, oh, I'm a star seed and this person isn't. I was like, oh, that person just doesn't know. They just don't know that they're more than they are. They just don't know that they're not alone in the universe. And for me, that's what that meant. And like, then I had experiences with like, you know, feeling ancestors and understanding more, and even like ancestors to me, it's like, when I started having actual ancestor connections, like, they go back 500 plus years, or it is those few natives that are there. It's like my grandparents, but it's like those that have a lot of trauma, like, I have worked with them and have dealt with that. But in general, it's given me a sense of like, you're never really alone in this world. Like, you have a deeper spiritual sense that you can lean on, as well as also, if you need that title to make yourself feel better, that is okay. But look at like why you need that when you're ready, you know. But at the same time, if you're walking around going, and I'm not judging you, I'm just saying this attitude probably doesn't serve you in your life. But if you look at the cashier at Walmart and go, I'm a starseed, I'm an indigo kid, I'm a rainbow child, and they're not, and that makes me have a better purpose in my life, and I know who I am, and so they're always going to be sad and I'm going to be happier. You know, I went a little deep on that, like the direction. It's like,
but it's the same
those
thing.
are real thoughts that come up for people. Those are real thoughts. And it's like, if any of those thoughts come up there, you're dividing yourself from them. And maybe you don't go that deep where you're like, I'll be happy, they won't. Well, maybe you don't go, I'm better than them, but you might go, well, I'll be happy in my life and they won't be happy in their life. That is still that level of judgment of, because I identify as this thing, I'm better than them. you may not actually think you're better, but thinking you're going to be happier. So even me just now, when I was like, it may not serve you, that's why I put it in that standpoint, because like, I don't know you and your exact self, but I do know that when we put ourselves above each other, it generally in the long run doesn't serve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
It's well, the last thing I'll say on there is it's a state of victimhood. It's like there's that last little bit there, like too, of like, do you want this title because you want to escape your victimness? Like, and are you wearing it as a label? It's like the example, and like I use this example a lot, and I fully have this client's permission. But like she was in an abusive relationship. And so technically she used to wear the name tag of I'm Matt's punching bag. And she walked around wearing her trauma. It's the same thing of victimism. And it's like, I'm not saying it's what you're doing with star seeds, but it's like, if you're using it to escape the things that have been hard in life, you're playing victim in life. You're still playing this victimhood. And it's like, it's never about the other person. And if you want to have a deeper talk about that, like we can at some point, anyone out there that wants to have a deeper talk about
it's
like
we're available, we're here, like
we're here. Like I'll go into that and I'll prove to you how it's not about the other person. But like in that example of my friend, you know, she's not Matt's punching bag. That's not who she is.
Yeah.
But yes, he did that to her. Yes, it sucked. Yes, it caused trauma. But as long as she walks around identifying as that, she is less than Matt. She is less than the rest of us. She's less than us because she has this trauma as tag. The exact opposite is true when it's like, I have now become this being that now works with angels and spirit guides. So I know the answers. It's the same thing. It's slapping on the label of I'm an ascended master in training, or I'm an ascended master. I'm Jesus incarnate now. Like, and I'm taking it to the extreme for a reason. Because I'm not trying to call anyone out in particular, but it's like, just recognize, like, how are you showing up in the world? And in general, are you happy with how you're showing up in the world?
Or like you can even extrapolate it a bit more. It's like, are you happy in general? Like when you look at the world, are you happy? And it's like, again, I like this now that it's come back to like one of the things we started with. It's like it's triggering you in a positive action. Where it's like when you're triggered, when you feel one of those, those identities come up, what's your reaction to it? It's like, are you going to go deeper into that victimhood? Are you going to identify as something and keep on identifying as other things? Or are you going to take the energy that you could spend doing that and use it to create, and then create a world where you don't need to identify as anything else other than the beautiful thing that you already are? It's like, it's that discussion again of triggers. It's like, okay, I'm feeling something, I'm feeling a sensation that I'm not happy with. Okay, I'm going to go and create something that means that I am going to be happy. Or I'm going to take that fire, I'm going to take that drive, and I'm going to go do something with it. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to reframe our mindset, but I think it's well worth it when we do, because like we're doing it in service of a greater thing.
It's well worth it. Like reframing in general is well worth it. Like really looking at life and like, why am I not happy? What would make me happy? Trigger into action, trigger in. It's like this solution forward mindset, which yes, is that humanism of how can I improve myself? How can I be better? But even if you're not trying to improve yourself personally, it can still be like, how do I want to change my life? What am I not satisfied with? And it's like, we're blessed in a beautiful world where it's like, not all of us are dealt the same hand in life, but a lot of us are dealt, like there is a way to shift aspects. There is a way to shift your emotional state. There is a way to shift your mental state. There is a way to have the tools to go through life as a happy person and realize happiness is also a flux. It's not like you're happy 24/7. Like,
right, it's an ebb and a flow, and like this, like it reminds me of another thing. We're gonna keep getting off of other tangents. we need to wrap it up. It's like there's always such little good nuggets that I don't.
I know. It sparks something, and then
and it, like this is another like a perfect example in terms of relationships, and it's something that one of my clients came to me recently about it, and I had to talk with her about it, and it was such an interesting idea. We have this perception in relationships that we have to be happy all the time. Right, that it's like, oh well, I have to be in, or like even in like another way of putting it, we have to be in love with our partner 24/7. You know, it's like we have to like love and be perfect with our partner 24/7. It's like actually a healthy relationship ebbs and flows. Like it's completely okay for you to make like for you to still care about your partner and still want to be with them, but not be madly in love with them like 24/7. Like it's gonna ebb and flow. And like you might wake up another morning and be like, you know what? Yeah, I really love you today. Like, wow, like you're like the most amazing person I've ever met. And then the next day or a week from then, you can wake up and be like, I still care about you. I still love you. It's great, but it's not that same kind of like immediate passion and new way, like new relationship energy that you have. It's like, that's okay. Like you don't have to be completely happy 24/7, and you're not, and like I don't think you're gonna be at the same time. And there's gonna be stuff that comes up. You're like, this kind of sucks. Like this is a struggle to get through. But it's like as soon as you accept that a healthy relationship, and like I'm not just speaking in terms of relationship, in terms of like partnerships or like with people, it's like your relationship with something in general, it ebbs and flows completely. I think that creates a healthier dynamic because it releases expectations. You know, it's like this thing's not going to make me happy all the time. This person's not going to be the answer to all my problems, right? Or like even if we were to put it in the realm of money and finances, right? Like people have this perception of saying, oh well, money doesn't solve all your problems. Like, well, no, like money will solve all of your money problems. Like all of the problems that result from your money and lack of finances, money will solve those. And that will then give you the freedom and the opportunity to then expand into other things that bring you more joy and happiness. But you're not gonna be able to do that unless your financial needs are taken care of. Money will solve all your money problems. It won't solve non-money problems, right? It's like if you have a shit relationship with your parents, when you have, whether you have $1,000 or 100,000, you're still gonna have a shit relationship with your parents, right? Unless you do something else, but the money is going to afford you more time for introspection and more time to, you know, talk to them that maybe you can get it figured out. But the money itself isn't, like your relationship with the money is not going to affect your other things in your life, right?
100%.
But having that understanding that there is that ebb and flow and it's a give and a take, and it's this sense of equilibrium, I think, and this is another important concept. I think this is a lovely point to end on as well, because people confuse balance and equilibrium a lot. Balance, like there's this, like balance is a bit of a buzzword right now, and it has been a buzzword for the past like 10 years where everyone's like, yes, I'm very zen, I am achieving perfect balance for all of my life, right? It's like when you look into the actual definition of balance, it's a single point, right? Like if you imagine a scale there, it's like balance is the point where there is equal weight on both sides so that there's no movement, right? It's like a singular point. Problem you have is you look at the rest of nature, no movement is stagnation, right? And there is no growth, there is no change when things are stagnant. Instead, what I like to help people reframe towards and think about is actually, rather than striving for that perfect point of 50-50, strive for equilibrium, right? Strive for a sense of, okay, in different contexts, this part of me or this kind of thing is going to be more empowered than this part. And that's fine. And again, we can go down so many different layers where we're going into like masculine and feminine, whatever kind of thing. It's like people, I heard this weird debate of people saying, like, oh, you know, you need to have a good balance between masculine and feminine energy. It's like, no, different situations are going to require you to use different ones. If sometimes you're going to need to be fully more in your assertive dominant side, and other times you're going to need to be more receptive. And again, there are other concerns I have about giving labels and things like that to masculine and feminine, but we can get to that in another
we'll go to that in another episode. We'll dive down the masculine feminine route.
Yeah, that's another point, we'll get into it. But it's like the core idea here is really like, don't judge yourself if you're not having things in perfect 50-50, because nothing's going to be perfect 50-50, right? It's much healthier for you to acknowledge that different situations are going to require different levels of investment, different levels of being, all that kind of thing. And it's okay. It's like sometimes you're going to, and it's like, if we relate back to relationships real quick, it's like there are a bunch of different like sayings and ways to go about this. And sometimes when people are like, oh, relationships are 50-50, or it's like, and then like it kind of changed a little bit in the self-help stuff, because they're like, no, they're not 50-50, because then you're only putting 50% effort. Relationships are 100-100. And it's like, I also have issue with that, because like some days, it's unrealistic to expect you to show up at 100% every day. Like some days you're going to get up and the best you can do if you're having a shit day is 20%. Right. And it's like some days it's going to be 80-20 in your relationship. Some days you can apply this to anything, whether it's a spiritual practice, whether it's a love relationship, whatever it is. Like some days you're not going to be at 100. And it's unrealistic to expect yourself to have a perfect day every single day. So when you're having a shit day, just let yourself have a shit day. Right? Just let yourself do it and be like, you did the best for your capacity of that day. It's like if 20% is your capacity for that day and 20% you're giving your 100 on that day. It just so happens that on that day, 20% is your 100. So if we then put it into relationships, it's like if you're in a good place, and like, you know, you may be in a good place at work, you just got a good raise, whatever it is, anything that's happening, you know, your friend's doing really well, and you're able to come up and you're able to put in a good 80, 90, 100% on a day, but your partner's not, and their partner's just having a shit day and needs some support, and maybe they can only put in 40% of their time, like, that's okay. And it's the same with you at the same time. Like, that's the time when like there's a sense of equilibrium where it's like, okay, I can hold you where you're at. I can see you for where I can meet you where you're at, and I can support you in how you need it. Right. I'm not expecting you to show up perfect. Like, I know you're just trying to figure stuff out. I know you're going through something hard right now. Let's sit down and see if I can support you. Like, weigh it on me. You know, let's have a look. It's like, I guess it's something that annoys me a little bit when people are like, things have to be perfect. Things are always 100, right? It's like, that's not, I love the idea that we're thinking in a kind of ideal, perfect world, but it's like, in reality, we're human. People make mistakes. People mess up. People are trying to figure themselves out a lot of the time. And it's like, you got to be there for them. Like, and if you're in that kind of relationship, like if you're friends, if you're partners, whatever it is, like the trait of being able to work through stuff is being like, I'm here. Like, talk to me, work it out. It's like, it's one of those things that annoys, like even with triggers and stuff, it's an annoying thing where like my biggest pet peeve, because like communication is my big love language. Right, it's like there are tons of different love language. I know communication isn't like an official love language, but like it's my love language, right? It's like when there's stuff going on, I love to talk about it. I love to work it out, and I love to like bounce off you, right? It's like my thing. I love it. And it's like when people don't do that, it's like it's a thing for me. I can fully acknowledge it's like a me thing, right? But like when people shut down, like it's a real challenge for me. It's like if I'm like trying to talk to somebody, I'm like, hey, there's an issue. Hey, there's something going on here. And they just shut down or they run away and they just button up. I'm like, I really want to talk about this with you. Can we meet in the middle somewhere? Can we do something? It's like, but then when people are like, no, I'm triggered. I'm not talking to you. I'm running away, whatever it is. It's like, I'm not able to roll with that. You know, like I'm not able to meet you where you're at because you're not willing to meet me halfway here. You know, it's like, and I can understand like sometimes people are triggered and it's difficult to talk about it, but it's like, you know, like it's that understanding of like, even if there's arguments and stuff, it's like it's this understanding of it's like we're maybe fighting for our own viewpoint, but we're still on the same team. You know, like it's still a partnership there that we're working with. So I don't know, it's an interesting,
well,
it's an interesting debate.
It's an interesting debate. Well, there's two things I could go down the relationship one quite a bit here. The only thing I'll say on there is like you've touched on it like kind of twice there with even like the friendship thing and like the relationship thing is it's like the same goal, the same direction, the same purpose. Because like in a relationship and like I'll come back to equilibrium and balance in a second, but like the relationship, it's like if you both have the same principles and desires and you're aiming for the same things, then it becomes a level of like perspective difference. What information do you have that I don't have? Or what information am I not seeing? What emotional state am I in that I'm not thinking clearly? You know, and I'm using this like, for example, like me and my wife, like we're on the same page about a lot of things. Like we're aiming the same goals. Like we hold the same values in like the marriage in the sense of like, like no argument is really divorce level. Like, you know, like we know we want to be together. So it's like if we're arguing, and we don't argue very much at all, but like if we're having a tiff or something, it is like sometimes it's like, hey, I need to step away for 2 minutes. Or sometimes like it ends and we don't even like apologize. We're just like, yeah, that was dumb. And like, we'll just move forward with the day. Like, but it's like, sometimes it's like, okay, I know you love me. I know I love you. And I know that we're both trying to accomplish the same thing. So really, what are you seeing that I'm not seeing? Or where am I acting emotional? You know, and sometimes it does take like a moment to step away. And like, if you are in a moment, you're like, okay, I need a second, but like, that's still communication of going, hey, I need
it's vocalizing your needs.
So I don't say the wrong thing. So I don't say something out of passion versus out of heart. There's a difference there, you know, in emotion versus out of heart. And that's something I'd love to dive down. It's like, you know, maybe in our next podcast, like we'll dive down relationships and masculine and feminine. But the final thing I wanted to say about balance and equilibrium is like your body does it. When you walk, you go back and forth and you walk in a straight line. Your hips are moving. They're not balanced. Now, balance is beautiful. and it's a stillness. And I feel like balance is a yoga pose. You're making
like
yoga
there's
pose,
space for it.
there's
Absolutely.
space for it, but it doesn't like you would not want to hold a yoga pose for the rest of your life, no matter what yoga pose, even if it's the most easiest, even if it's plank, even if it's just laying on your back on the ground, the relaxation pose, you wouldn't want to do that forever.
Yeah, because there's no movement, there's no
There's no
growth
movement,
there.
but it serves for a time. And so it's like even that balance is part of equilibrium, where it's like I'm balanced, now I'm unbalanced, now I'm balanced. And I think this ties into ascension as well, and that's something we can dive into later. But enlightenment and all that, like I feel like enlightenment, happiness, ascension, those are all things that we can feel, but you come in and out of them. Like you go into them, you come out of them. They're flow, they're equilibrium. It's what makes it work. And same with everything we see. And like this is something like kind of tying back to something we talked about earlier, but like that demonization of anything, of like viewing something as evil versus like some things are dark, but that doesn't make them evil.
Yeah.
Like even right now, like looking in both of these, at both me and Chris, like there's tons of colors you can see right now. You can only see those colors because darkness exists and because light exists. So like the duality, they need each other and that makes them one. But also we can only experience anything because there's a spectrum. And this is something like, last thing I'll say is like with emotions and like that equilibrium thing. It's like when people be like, I have to stay happy at all times, that's a spiritual trap I see in the spiritual community. Or they're like,
it's toxic positivity. Absolutely.
Only feel pain for 2 seconds. Only feel sadness for, I'm sad. Okay, now back to happiness. It's like, no, when you actually feel guilt and shame, it will lead you up into other things. Like if I admit that I feel guilty about something and I'm not proud of myself, so that's shame. I'm not proud of myself, but I'm actually kind of pissed off about myself that I didn't do that. Like I'm angry at myself, but I'm going to make a choice here to do something different. And so I'm going to make a different choice. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to get out of this thing and not do that again. I just moved from shame into a feeling of courage, and it's like, granted, I did that in like 30 seconds here on a call, but it's like in reality, if I was really doing this for myself, like I would sit in that shame until I'm ready to move on to guilt. And then until I'm ready to move on to things. And it's like acknowledging it enough to feel it enough, but not get stuck in it. It's like, if you need to cry, let it all out, let it all out. But then if you hit the point, you're like, okay, like it's all out. And now I'm just kind of crying to cry. And I want to stay in this uncomfortability. Then you might be putting yourself in a stuckness. And this is like the trap of depression too, sometimes, where people are like, they allow themselves to feel it for too long. And it's like, feel it long enough until you feel that desire to change out of it. And if you don't feel that desire to change out of it, reach out to people, out, and so forth. But I'm using the lower examples for that, but it's like equilibrium is that back and forth. It's a walking forward. It's a movement. And there really isn't anything stagnant in this life. Like, and if you do,
everything is moving.
Everything's moving. If you ever taste stagnant water or you smell stagnant air, you'll know it doesn't taste great and it doesn't smell great. And it's like, it needs that movement. So with that, this has been wonderful, Chris. And I know we could talk for hours upon hours, and we will continue to talk for hours and hours. And so hopefully you guys have gained value out of this, had a great time. And of course, if you have gained value, do all the things that everyone always says in all their videos. But really, I want to engage with you. I want to hear from you. And if you want to see more of me and Chris, we have an online community called Golden Shadow Academy. Keep being your awesome selves. And anything else you'd like to say in farewell with Chris?
So thanks for listening, everyone. And I'll echo everything you just said, Garth. We are actively working towards creating some amazing curriculums and some amazing sort of educational things in Golden Shadow. It's really, really exciting. We're getting this off to a really great start. So I'm excited, and I want to see you guys there. It's going to be really, really fun. So as usual, like, share, subscribe, all the typical stuff. And keep being your awesome selves.
And please only like and subscribe if you got value out of this. Like, I'm not just asking you to do that as like a normal, hey, no, like if you got value, then please do. But if you didn't get value, tell us in the comments you didn't get value. All right. Peace.